The night Lillian Vance realized she'd married a ghost, she stood at the window of Iron Ridge Estate watching her husband walk away from their wedding breakfast without a word. Not a glance. Not even acknowledgement that she existed. 3 years later, she would make him beg. This is the story of a woman who refused to disappear, who turned rejection into power, silence into strategy, and a frozen marriage into the fight of her life. If you want to see how an invisible duchess brought a duke to his knees, stay until the end. Drop a like, tell us where you're watching from, and let's begin. The carriage wheels crunched over fresh snow as Lillian Vance, no, Lillian Hale now, arrived at Iron Ridge Estate for the first time as a wife. The journey from her family's modest country home had taken 2 days, and her hands were numb despite the fur-lined gloves her mother had pressed into her palms before she left. "You'll do well," her mother had whispered, tears in her eyes. "The Hales are a prestigious family. This is an opportunity." An opportunity. That's what they'd called it when the marriage contract arrived. Lillian's father, a country gentleman with more debts than land, had nearly wept with relief. The Duke of Iron Ridge, young, titled, wealthy, seeking a bride. Not a love match, certainly. Those didn't exist at their social level. But a respectable alliance. Lillian had signed the papers without protest. What choice did a 22-year-old woman with no fortune and no prospects have? The estate loomed before her now, all gray stone and sharp angles cutting into the winter sky. No welcoming lights in the windows, no servants gathered at the door, just cold, imposing silence. The carriage stopped. Lillian waited for someone to open the door. No one came. She pushed it open herself, her boots sinking into snow that came up past her ankles. The cold bit through her traveling dress immediately. She grabbed her small trunk. The servants hadn't bothered with that either, and started toward the entrance. The massive oak doors opened just as she reached them, but not in welcome. A severe woman in black stood in the doorway, her face carved from the same stone as the manor. "Mrs. Hallowell," the woman said curtly, "housekeeper. Your rooms are in the east wing. Dinner is at 8. The Duke dines alone." Lillian blinked. "I'm sorry. I don't understand." "The Duke dines alone, Mrs." Hallowell repeated as if speaking to a child. "You'll take your meals in your sitting room. Your maid will bring them up." "But I'm his wife." "The east wing, madam. 3rd floor. Your trunk will be brought up." The door closed in her face. Lillian stood there, snow gathering on her shoulders, staring at the solid wood. Her breath came out in white clouds. Somewhere inside that massive, silent building was the man she'd married 3 weeks ago in a ceremony so brief and impersonal it might have been a business transaction. It had been a business transaction. She hadn't even seen Rowan Hale since the wedding. He'd left immediately after signing the register, murmuring something about estate business to her father. There had been no wedding breakfast, no first dance, no anything. Just signatures and a carriage back to her family's home with instructions to pack her things. "Well," Lillian said to no one, her voice small in the vast white emptiness. "Here we are." She opened the door herself. The east wing was exactly as welcoming as the housekeeper. Dark hallways, closed doors, and a silence so complete Lillian could hear her own heartbeat. The room they'd given her was technically a suite, a bedroom, a sitting room, a dressing room, but it felt more like a well-appointed prison. No fire in the grate. The bed was made but looked unused, as if no one had slept there in years. The windows overlooked nothing but snow-covered fields stretching to a dark line of trees in the distance. Lillian set down her trunk and removed her gloves with shaking fingers. Not from cold anymore. From something else. Something that felt dangerously close to panic. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, hating how uncertain her voice sounded. A young maid entered, barely 16, with red-rimmed eyes and a nervous expression. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, I'm Annie. I'm to be your lady's maid." "Annie," Lillian tried to smile. "Thank you. Could you possibly light the fire? It's quite cold." Annie bobbed a curtsy and scurried to the fireplace. As she worked, Lillian noticed the girl's hands were shaking too. "Annie," Lillian said gently, "is everything all right?" The girl's shoulders tensed. "Yes, Your Grace." "You seem frightened." "I'm not supposed to talk to you, ma'am. Mrs. Hallowell said so." Lillian's stomach dropped. "I see. And why is that?" Annie's silence was answer enough. The fire caught, and the girl stood quickly. Will there be anything else, Your Grace? Could you tell me where I might find the Duke, my husband? Annie's face went pale. The Duke doesn't receive visitors, ma'am, not in his wing. I'm not a visitor. I'm his wife. Yes, ma'am. Annie's eyes were fixed on the floor. But he doesn't receive anyone, not even... She cut herself off, looking terrified. Lillian felt something cold settle in her chest. Not even his wife? Annie curtsied again and fled. Lillian didn't see Rowan Hale for 3 days. She ate alone in her sitting room. She walked the hallways of the East Wing, finding nothing but empty guest rooms and locked doors. She tried to explore the rest of the house, and was politely but firmly turned away by servants who wouldn't meet her eyes. On the 4th day, she decided she'd had enough. She dressed in her best day gown, green silk that her mother had insisted on purchasing for the wedding, though Rowan hadn't been there to see it, and made her way to the West Wing where Annie had accidentally mentioned the Duke's study was located. The hallways here were different, darker, richer, thick carpets that muffled footsteps, oil paintings of stern-faced Hales glaring down from the walls, and at the end of the corridor, a door of polished mahogany. Lillian knocked. Silence. She knocked again, harder. I know you're in there. I can see the light under the door. More silence. Then, finally, a voice, cold and distant and utterly devoid of emotion. Go away. Lillian's hand tightened on the door handle. I'd like to speak with you. We have nothing to discuss. We're married. We have quite a lot to discuss, actually. The marriage is legal and binding. That's all that matters. You have rooms, an allowance, and the use of the estate. What more do you want? What more did she want? Lillian almost laughed. A husband who acknowledged her existence, perhaps? A partner instead of a warden? Basic human decency? I want to see you, she said, keeping her voice steady. Face to face, like civilized people. No. The word was flat, final. No explanation, no softness, nothing. Lillian pressed her forehead against the door. Why did you marry me if you never intended to be a husband? A long pause. Then, I needed a wife. You needed security. We both got what we wanted. This conversation is over. It's not over. Mrs. Hallowell will see you back to your rooms. Good day. Lillian heard footsteps inside the room, moving away from the door. She stood there, shaking with anger and humiliation, as the housekeeper appeared at her elbow, as if summoned by dark magic. Your Grace, Mrs. Hallowell said, her tone carefully neutral. Perhaps you'd like some tea in your sitting room. Lillian wanted to scream. She wanted to kick down that mahogany door and demand to be treated like a human being. She wanted to cry. Instead, she lifted her chin and said, No, thank you. I'll take a walk in the garden. It's snowing, madam. I'm aware. She walked past the housekeeper, down the grand staircase and out into the biting cold. Her thin slippers soaked through immediately, and she had no coat, but she didn't care. She walked until her feet were numb and her face was wet. Whether from snow or tears, she couldn't tell. This was her life now. This silent, frozen prison, this marriage to a ghost. She was 22 years old and she'd disappeared. The pattern repeated for weeks. Lillian ate alone, slept alone, wandered the estate like a ghost herself, trying to find some purpose, some reason to exist in this vast emptiness. She tried to engage the servants in conversation, but they'd been well trained. Polite nods. Yes, Your Grace. No, Your Grace. And then they'd disappear like smoke. She tried to visit the village, but the carriage wasn't available. When she asked why, Mrs. Hallowell informed her that the Duke preferred his wife to remain at the estate. Preferred, Lillian repeated. He prefers this. It's for your safety, madam. The roads are dangerous in winter. I grew up in the country. I know winter roads. Nevertheless, those are His Grace's wishes. She was a prisoner, not in chains, but in silk and propriety, and the unspoken rules of a house that had already decided she didn't matter. The only glimpses she got of Rowan were distant ones. She'd see him from her window sometimes, riding across the fields on a massive black horse. Or she'd hear his voice in the hallway below, speaking to his steward in low, clipped tones. Once, she passed him in the gallery, actually came face to face with him for the first time since the wedding. He was taller than she remembered. Dark hair, sharp features, ice-gray eyes that looked through her like she was glass. He wore his wealth and title like armor. "Your Grace," she said, stopping in front of him. He paused. For a moment, she thought he might actually speak to her, acknowledge her, see her. Then he stepped around her and kept walking. Not a word, not even a glance that truly registered her presence. Lillian stood frozen in the empty gallery, listening to his footsteps fade away. Something inside her cracked. Not broke, not yet, but cracked. That night, she cried for the first time since arriving at Iron Ridge. She buried her face in her pillow so Annie wouldn't hear and sobbed until her throat was raw. This was worse than loneliness. This was erasure. But winter turned to early spring, though you couldn't tell from inside Iron Ridge's walls. The snow melted, revealing dead gardens and gray stone. Lillian's world remained exactly the same. But something was shifting inside her. She'd spent months trying to be the perfect duchess, trying to be seen, to be acknowledged, to somehow earn her husband's attention. She'd worn her best dresses, arranged her hair carefully, practiced conversation in case he ever deigned to speak to her. She'd read books on estate management, thinking perhaps she could be useful to him. None of it mattered. One morning in early April, Lillian woke up and looked at herself in the mirror. Really looked. Her face was pale, shadows under her eyes. She'd lost weight. Annie had to take in her dresses. Her hair, once her best feature, hung limp and lifeless. She looked like a ghost. She was becoming invisible. And suddenly, with startling clarity, Lillian realized something. She could die here. Not literally, perhaps, but the person she'd been, the girl who'd loved music and laughter and long walks through the countryside, that girl was already dying. Fading away in this silent, frozen house. Rowan Hale didn't care. He'd made that abundantly clear. The servants didn't care. They followed orders. No one was coming to save her, so she would save herself. "Annie," she said when the girl brought breakfast, "I need you to send for the dressmaker." Annie blinked. "The dressmaker, Your Grace?" "Yes, and the milliner. And tell Mrs. Hallowell I'll need the carriage tomorrow morning." "But the Duke," Lillian said clearly, "can go to hell. I'm the Duchess of Iron Ridge, and I'm done hiding in the East Wing. Make the arrangements." Annie's mouth fell open. Then slowly, a smile crept across her face. "Yes, Your Grace. Right away." For the first time in months, Lillian felt something other than despair. She felt angry. And anger, it turned out, was much more useful than hope. Mrs. Hallowell tried to stop her, of course. "The Duke has not given permission for you to go to London, Your Grace." Lillian was pulling on her gloves, checking her appearance one last time in the mirror. The dressmaker had done excellent work. The new traveling dress was elegant, fashionable, and made her look like a woman of consequence rather than a forgotten wife. "The Duke doesn't give me permission for anything, Mrs. Hallowell. He pretends I don't exist, so I'm going to start acting like he doesn't exist either. This is highly irregular. So is keeping a wife prisoner in her own home. Tell His Grace, if you can get him to listen, that I've gone to London for the season. I'll be staying with my aunt, Lady Pemberton." That was a slight exaggeration. Lillian had only met her aunt twice, and the woman hadn't seemed particularly fond of her. But Aunt Catherine was her mother's older sister, a widow with a house in Mayfair and a sharp tongue that could cut through steel. If anyone would take Lillian's side, it would be her. Mrs. Hallowell's face had gone red. "Your aunt! You can't simply—" "I can. I'm a duchess. I have an allowance. I have a title. And I'm done being invisible." She swept past the housekeeper and down to the waiting carriage. Her hands were shaking, but she kept her spine straight and her face calm. The footman helped her in, looking shocked. Lillian caught Annie watching from an upstairs window, grinning like a fool. As the carriage pulled away from Iron Ridge Estate, Lillian looked back at the gray stone mansion one last time. Somewhere in there was the man she'd married, the man who'd condemned her to months of isolation and silence without a second thought. "Goodbye, Your Grace," she whispered. "Let's see how you like being ignored." London was overwhelming after months of silence. The noise, the crowds, the constant motion. It crashed over Lillian like a wave. But instead of drowning, she found herself gasping with relief. This was life. Messy, loud, chaotic life. Aunt Catherine's reaction to her arrival was everything Lillian had hoped for. "Finally," the older woman declared, looking Lillian up and down with sharp brown eyes. "I was wondering when you'd grow a spine. Come in, girl, you look half-starved. What has that ice prince been feeding you? Oh, don't answer. I can guess. Nothing. Men like Rowan Hale think women run on air and duty." Lillian's throat tightened. "You know him?" "Know of him. Everyone does. The Frozen Duke, they call him. His father was the same way. Cold bastard who nearly ran the estate into the ground before drinking himself to death. Rowan inherited at 21, cleaned up the mess, and apparently decided never to feel anything again." Catherine poured tea with brisk efficiency. "But you're not here to talk about him, are you? You're here to remember who you are. I don't even know who that is anymore." "Then we'll find out." Catherine smiled, and it was fierce. "You're a duchess now, girl. That means power, whether your husband acknowledges it or not. London is full of people who would kill for your friendship, your connections, your presence at their gatherings. So let's give them what they want. Let's show them that the Duchess of Ironridge is very much alive." For the first time in months, Lillian felt hope stir in her chest. Not hope that Rowan would change. She was done with that fantasy. Hope that she could change, that she could become someone who didn't need his approval to exist. "Where do we start?" she asked. Catherine's smile turned predatory. "With the dress. A very, very expensive dress. Charged to His Grace's account, naturally. If he's going to ignore you, the least he can do is pay for the privilege." The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it happened. Lillian threw herself into London society with the desperation of a drowning woman reaching for shore. Catherine introduced her to everyone who mattered, and more importantly, everyone who didn't matter to the stuffy old guard, but were actually interesting. Artists, writers, politicians, reformers. At first, Lillian was terrified. She'd forgotten how to make conversation, how to smile, how to be anything other than invisible. But Catherine was ruthless in her training. "Stop apologizing for taking up space," she'd snap. "You're a duchess. Act like one. Stop asking permission to speak. Just speak. Stop waiting for people to notice you. Make them notice." Slowly, Lillian's voice came back. Her laugh. The parts of herself she'd buried at Ironridge began to resurface. She discovered she had opinions. Strong ones. About politics. About art. About the ridiculous rules governing women's lives. She discovered she was clever enough to hold her own in debates with men twice her age. She discovered she was charming when she wanted to be, that people listened when she spoke. She discovered she'd been dying at Ironridge, and now she was coming back to life. Busk. 3 months into the season, Lillian attended her first major ball. She stood at the top of the stairs in Catherine's townhouse, looking at her reflection one last time. The dress was midnight blue silk, cut daringly low at the shoulders, with tiny crystals sewn into the bodice that caught the light like stars. Her hair was swept up, showing the graceful line of her neck. She looked like someone who mattered. She looked like a duchess. "Ready?" Catherine asked, resplendent in burgundy. Lillian took a deep breath. "Ready." The ballroom at Lady Ashworth's mansion was a whirl of color and light and music. Lillian had never seen anything like it. At Ironridge, there had been nothing but silence. Here, there was life. "Duchess!" a familiar voice called out. Lord Marcus Ashford, a young earl she'd met at one of Catherine's dinner parties, appeared at her elbow with a warm smile. "You look stunning. Would you do me the honor of the first dance?" Before Ironridge, Lillian would have blushed and stammered. Now she smiled and took his arm. "I'd be delighted." They swept onto the floor, and Lillian let the music carry her away. She was laughing, breathless, alive. Other couples swirled around them, but for the first time in forever, Lillian didn't feel like a shadow. She felt like herself. Between dances, she was surrounded by people. Lady Whitmore wanted to discuss the new women's education initiative. Lord Pembroke asked her opinion on the proposed factory reforms. Miss Charlotte Winters, a scandalously outspoken writer, invited her to a salon next week. Lillian said yes to everything. Why not? What did she have to lose? You've become quite popular, Marcus observed during their second dance. Everyone wants to know the mysterious Duchess who appeared out of nowhere. I've been here the whole time, Lillian said lightly. I just forgot I existed for a while. Marcus's expression turned serious. And your husband? Does he know you've remembered? It was the question everyone wanted to ask but was too polite to voice. The frozen duke and his invisible wife. London loved a good scandal, and their marriage, or lack thereof, was prime fodder. I honestly don't know, Lillian said. I haven't heard from him since I left Iron Ridge. Marcus looked genuinely shocked. Lillian, that's not right. You're his wife. On paper. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. In every way that matters, I'm free. The music swelled. Marcus twirled her across the floor, and Lillian caught a glimpse of herself in one of the massive gilt mirrors lining the wall. She looked happy. She looked powerful. She looked nothing like the ghost who'd wandered the halls of Iron Ridge, begging for scraps of attention from a man made of ice. That woman was gone, and Lillian had no intention of bringing her back. The letter arrived 2 weeks later. Lillian was having breakfast with Catherine, discussing which invitations to accept. There were too many now. She was becoming fashionable. When the butler brought in the morning post, one envelope stood out, heavy cream paper sealed with the Hale family crest. Lillian's hand trembled slightly as she picked it up. From your beloved husband? Catherine asked dryly. Apparently. She broke the seal and unfolded the single page. The handwriting was sharp, precise, utterly impersonal. Your presence is required at Iron Ridge. Return immediately. That was it. No greeting, no signature even. Just a command. Lillian read it twice, feeling something hot and dangerous rise in her chest. She'd spent months obeying the unspoken rules of her marriage. Months making herself small and quiet and invisible because that's what was expected. She was done with that. What does it say? Catherine asked. Lillian smiled and handed it over. He wants me to come home. Catherine read it and snorted. How romantic! What are you going to do? Lillian thought about Rowan Hale, the man who'd married her for convenience and condemned her to erasure without a second thought, the man who'd never once asked how she was, what she needed, if she was happy, the man who treated her like a piece of furniture, necessary for appearance's sake, but not worth actual attention. I'm going to ignore it, she said calmly. Just like he ignored me. Catherine's face split into a wicked grin. That's my girl. Lillian folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Tonight, she was attending the opera with Lord and Lady Pemberton. Tomorrow, Charlotte's salon. Next week, a charity gala where she'd been asked to speak about women's education. She had a life now. A real one. Rowan Hale could wait. Or better yet, he could learn what it felt like to be invisible. 3 more letters arrived over the next month, each one shorter and colder than the last. Return to Iron Ridge. Your absence is noted. This behavior is unacceptable. Lillian burned them all in Catherine's fireplace and watched the Hale family crest curl into ash. Each time, she felt a little lighter, a little more free. He's getting desperate, Catherine observed one evening as they prepared for yet another social engagement. That's good. Let him sweat. I don't think Rowan Hale sweats, Lillian said, fastening her emerald earrings. I think he just freezes things until they comply. Well, you're not freezing anymore, are you? No, she wasn't. The season was in full swing now, and Lillian had become something she'd never expected, popular. Not just tolerated or politely included, but actually sought after. People wanted her at their dinners, their salons, their garden parties. They listened when she spoke. They laughed at her jokes. They treated her like she mattered. It was intoxicating. But London society wasn't all champagne and compliments. Lillian was learning that quickly enough. The same people who smiled to her face whispered behind her back. She'd caught fragments of conversation at the last ball. The abandoned duchess. How desperate. Throwing herself at every eligible man. Let them talk. She'd spent months in silence. A little gossip was nothing compared to that. "Ready?" Catherine called from the doorway. "Lord Ashford's carriage is here." Lillian took one last look in the mirror. The woman staring back at her wore crimson silk and a knowing smile. Her eyes were bright, alive. She looked dangerous. "Good." "Ready," she said. Marcus Ashford had become something of a constant presence in Lillian's life. Not a suitor, exactly. They'd been clear about that from the start. But a friend. A genuine one. He was easy to talk to, made her laugh, and never once looked at her like she was broken. Tonight, he was escorting her to the theater, along with Catherine and a few other friends. The play was supposed to be scandalous, which meant half of London would be there to judge it while pretending to be shocked. "You look radiant," Marcus said as he helped her into the carriage. "That color suits you." "Thank you, though I suspect you say that to all the ladies. Only the ones who deserve it." He settled into the seat across from her, grinning. "Have you heard from the frozen Duke lately?" Lillian's smile tightened. "Please don't call him that." "Why not? Everyone else does." "Because he's still my husband, technically." "Technically." Marcus's expression turned serious. "Lillian, forgive me for being blunt, but what exactly are you doing with all of this?" He gestured vaguely at her dress, the carriage, the life she was building. "I'm surviving." "By flaunting yourself all over London? By making him look like a fool?" The words stung more than they should have. "I'm not flaunting anything. I'm simply existing in public, which apparently is revolutionary behavior for a Hale wife." "You know what people are saying?" "I know exactly what people are saying." Lillian's voice was sharp now. "That I'm desperate. That I'm throwing myself at you, at Lord Pembroke, at anyone who'll look at me. That I'm an embarrassment to my husband's title." Marcus winced. "I didn't mean—" "But here's what's interesting, Marcus. No one said a word when my husband locked me away in that estate for months. No one thought that was strange or cruel or worth gossiping about. But the moment I dare to have friends, attend parties, live my life, suddenly I'm the scandal." The carriage rattled over cobblestones. Catherine, seated beside Lillian, put a hand on her arm. "He's not trying to hurt you, dear," the older woman said quietly. "He's worried. We all are." "Worried about what?" "About what happens when this game you're playing comes to an end," Marcus said. "Rowan Hale isn't the type of man to be publicly humiliated and do nothing about it. I'm not humiliating him, I'm ignoring him. There's a difference." "Not to a duke, there isn't." Lillian looked out the window at the London streets rolling past. Gas lamps casting golden pools on wet pavement. People hurrying about their lives, free and purposeful. She'd been one of them for 3 months now. The thought of going back to Ironridge, to that silent prison, made her chest tight with panic. "I'm not going back," she said quietly. "Not unless he gives me a reason to. A real one." Marcus sighed. "Then I hope you're prepared for the consequences." So did she. The theater was packed, as expected. Lillian could feel eyes on her the moment they entered the box Marcus had reserved. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. "There she is. The Hale Duchess. Shameless, really." Lillian kept her head high and her smile fixed. This was the price of visibility. She'd take it over invisibility any day. The play was actually quite good, a biting satire about marriage and social climbing that hit a little too close to home. Lillian found herself laughing despite the pointed looks from the box across from theirs, where Lady Thornbury sat with her gaggle of proper boring friends. During intermission, Marcus fetched champagne while Catherine held court with a group of literary types who wanted to discuss the play's feminist themes. Lillian stood at the edge of the box, watching the crowd mill about below. "Duchess Hale." The voice was unfamiliar. Lillian turned to find a woman she didn't recognize. Older, perhaps 40, dressed in gray silk that whispered money and taste. Her face was beautiful in a cold, precise way. "Yes?" "Forgive the intrusion. I'm Lady Victoria Ashworth, Marcus's mother." "Ah." Lillian had heard of her. Widowed young, notoriously particular about her son's associations. This couldn't be good. "Lady Ashworth, it's a pleasure to meet you." "Is it?" Victoria's smile was thin. "I wonder, you've been spending quite a lot of time with my son lately." "We're friends." "Friends." Victoria repeated the word like it was something distasteful. How modern? Tell me, Duchess, what exactly are your intentions toward Marcus? Lillian blinked. I beg your pardon? He's young, impressionable, and you're a beautiful woman in a difficult position. I want to know if you're using my son to get back at your husband. The accusation was so blunt, so openly hostile, that for a moment Lillian couldn't speak. Around them, the intermission chatter continued, oblivious. I'm not using anyone, Lillian said carefully. Marcus and I are friends. Nothing more. Good. See that it stays that way. Victoria's eyes were hard. My son deserves better than to be a pawn in your marital drama. He deserves a woman who's actually free to love him, not one who's still legally bound to the coldest man in England. I would never hurt Marcus, perhaps not intentionally, but you will hurt him. Women like you always do. Victoria glanced at Marcus, who was making his way back with champagne glasses balanced carefully. You're playing a dangerous game, Duchess. Rowan Hale isn't going to let you embarrass him forever. And when he finally acts, everyone near you will get burned, including my son. She swept away before Lillian could respond, leaving nothing but the faint scent of lavender and the sick feeling in Lillian's stomach. Marcus appeared at her elbow, offering champagne. Everything all right? You look pale. Your mother was just here. His face fell. What did she say? That I'm using you. That I'm going to get you hurt. Lillian, is she right? The words came out harsher than she intended. Am I being selfish? Am I dragging you into something you don't deserve? Marcus set down the champagne and took her hands. His were warm, steady, real. Listen to me, he said firmly. You are not using me. You're my friend, one of the best I've ever had. And if my mother can't see that, that's her problem, not yours. But what if she's right about Rowan? What if he... Then we'll deal with it, together. Marcus squeezed her hands. You're not alone anymore, Lillian. Remember that. The lights flickered, signaling the end of intermission. People began filing back to their seats. Lillian took a shaky breath and managed a smile. Thank you. Always. But as they settled back into their seats and the play resumed, Lillian couldn't shake Victoria's words. When he finally acts, everyone near you will get burned. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for Rowan to act. Maybe it was time to force his hand herself. The opportunity came 2 weeks later at the Pembroke Ball. It was the event of the season. Everyone who mattered would be there, and plenty who didn't but wanted to be seen. Catherine had secured invitations months ago, and she'd made it very clear that Lillian needed to make an impression. This is your moment, Catherine said as they prepared. The Pembrokes are old money, old power. If you can win them over, you'll be untouchable in society. Even Rowan won't be able to drag you back to Ironridge if you have the Pembrokes' support. Lillian's dress for the evening was a masterpiece, pale gold silk that shimmered like liquid light, with delicate beading that caught every candle flame. Her hair was swept up in an elaborate style that had taken Annie, who'd followed her to London, bless the girl, 2 hours to perfect. She looked like a duchess. She looked like power. Remember, Catherine said as their carriage pulled up to the Pembroke mansion. Head high, smile bright, and never let them see you sweat. I know the rules by now. Good girl. The ballroom was even more magnificent than Lady Ashworth's had been. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, flowers everywhere. The cream of London society glittered like jewels under the lights. Lillian spotted Marcus immediately. He'd promised to save her a dance. But before she could make her way over, someone else caught her attention. Lord Edmund Pembroke himself, their host, was watching her from across the room. He was perhaps 60, distinguished in the way only old aristocracy could be, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He started toward her, and the crowd parted like water. Duchess Hale, he said, bowing over her hand, what a pleasure to finally meet the woman everyone in London is talking about. I hope they're saying kind things, Lord Pembroke. They're saying interesting things. Which is better? He smiled. Would you do me the honor of a dance? I find myself curious about the Duchess, who appeared out of nowhere and conquered half of London in 3 months. It wasn't really a request. Lillian took his offered arm and let him lead her onto the floor. The orchestra struck up a waltz, and they began to move. You've caused quite a stir, Pembroke said conversationally. Leaving your husband, setting up in London, making friends in what some might call radical circles. I didn't leave my husband, Lord Pembroke. I simply declined to remain his prisoner. Interesting distinction. Tell me, what does the Duke of Ironridge think of your independence? I honestly don't know. He doesn't share his thoughts with me. No, I don't suppose he would. The Hales have never been good at communication, or emotion, or basic human decency, really. Pembroke's tone was light, but his eyes were serious. Rowan's father was my contemporary, you know. Terrible man. Drank himself to death and left his son with a mountain of debt and a horror of feeling anything. Lillian nearly stumbled. I didn't know that. Most people don't. The Hales keep their scandals quiet. But I remember young Rowan before his father died. He was different then. Almost human. Pembroke spun her expertly through a turn. Then his father's debts came to light, and the boy had to spend 5 years clawing the estate back from ruin. Changed him. Made him hard. That doesn't excuse how he's treated me. No, it doesn't. I'm simply providing context. They danced in silence for a moment. Then, what do you want, Duchess? The question was so direct it caught her off guard. I'm sorry. What do you want? From life? From society? From your marriage? What's the end game here? Lillian thought about it. Really thought about it. I want to matter, she said finally. I want my life to be mine. I want to wake up every morning knowing that I exist for reasons beyond legal convenience. Pembroke nodded slowly. That's a good answer. An honest one. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Let me give you some advice, young lady. London society will embrace you as long as you're entertaining. But the moment you stop being interesting, or the moment your scandal becomes too messy, they'll drop you like a hot coal. If you want real power, the kind that lasts, you need more than popularity. What do I need? Purpose. Position. Something that makes you indispensable. The music was winding down. You're a duchess. That title comes with responsibilities, opportunities. Use them. Build something that can't be taken away when the gossip moves on. The waltz ended. Pembroke bowed, and Lillian curtsied, her mind racing. Thank you for the dance, she said, and the advice. You're welcome. Oh, and Duchess? He paused, a slight smile on his lips. Your husband just arrived. Thought you should know. Lillian's heart stopped. She turned slowly, scanning the crowd. And there, standing in the entrance to the ballroom like a dark storm cloud, was Rowan Hale. He'd come to London. He'd come for her. Rowan Hale looked exactly as she remembered. Tall, dark, forbidding. He wore formal evening clothes that fit him perfectly, emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders and the cold precision of his bearing. His ice-gray eyes swept the ballroom like a predator searching for prey. When they landed on Lillian, she felt the impact like a physical blow. For a moment, neither of them moved. The ballroom continued around them, music, laughter, dancing, but Lillian was frozen in place, unable to look away. Rowan started toward her, and the crowd parted just as it had for Pembroke. But this was different. People moved out of fear, not respect. The frozen Duke had that effect. Lillian's instinct was to run, to flee, like she had that awful day at Ironridge when she'd stood outside his study begging to be seen. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She'd spent 3 months rebuilding herself into something stronger, so she stood her ground. Rowan stopped in front of her. Up close, she could see the tension in his jaw, the barely controlled anger in his eyes. We need to talk, he said. His voice was exactly as she remembered, cold, clipped, devoid of warmth. No, we don't. Lillian, it's Duchess Hale to you, Your Grace. We're not familiar enough for first names. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise? Anger? She couldn't tell. You've ignored my letters, he said. You've ignored me for 8 months. I thought I'd return the favor. Around them, people were staring. Of course they were. The frozen Duke confronting his runaway wife in the middle of the Pembroke ball. This was gossip gold. Lillian should have been mortified. 3 months ago, she would have been. Now, she just felt tired. This is neither the time nor the place. Rowan said through gritted teeth. Then perhaps you should leave. I'm here as a guest. You crashed uninvited. You're my wife. On paper. Lillian stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. You made it very clear that our marriage was a legal formality and nothing more. So why are you here, Rowan? What do you possibly want from me now? For the first time, she saw genuine emotion cross his face. Not anger, something rawer. You're embarrassing me. And there it was. The truth. He didn't care that she'd been lonely. He didn't care that she'd suffered. He cared that she was making him look bad. Good, Lillian said softly. Now you know how it feels. She turned to walk away, but his hand shot out and caught her wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop her. Let go of me, she said, her voice deadly quiet. Not until you agree to come back to Iron Ridge. We can discuss this there, away from prying eyes. I'm not going back to that prison ever. You don't have a choice. Yes, I do. I have money, a title, and friends who actually care about me. What do you have? An empty estate and a reputation for cruelty? Rowan's grip tightened. You don't understand what you're doing. Your Grace, Marcus appeared at Lillian's side, his usually friendly expression replaced by something hard and dangerous. I believe the lady asked you to let go. Rowan's eyes shifted to Marcus, and Lillian saw recognition flash there. And something else, something she'd never seen in her husband's face before. Jealousy. Lord Ashford, Rowan said, his voice dripping with disdain. How convenient that you're here. Tell me, have you enjoyed playing knight to my wife? I've enjoyed being her friend, something you apparently never bothered to try. Friend, Rowan's laugh was harsh. Is that what they're calling it? Marcus took a step forward, and Lillian quickly put herself between them. The last thing she needed was a brawl in the middle of the Pembroke ball. Enough, she said firmly. Both of you. She pulled her wrist free from Rowan's grasp and stepped back. Her heart was pounding, her hands shaking, but she kept her voice steady. Rowan, you need to leave. Now. I'm not leaving without you. Then you'll be here a very long time. They stared at each other, locked in a battle of wills that drew every eye in the ballroom. Lillian was aware of the whispers, the shocked faces, the scandal unfolding in real time. She didn't care. Let them talk. Let them judge. She was done being the quiet, obedient wife who suffered in silence while her husband pretended she didn't exist. This isn't over, Rowan said quietly. You can play at independence all you want, but you're still legally my wife. That means something. It means I can't remarry, Lillian shot back. Beyond that, it means nothing. You made sure of that. She turned and walked away, Marcus falling into step beside her. She could feel Rowan's eyes boring into her back, but she didn't look around. Catherine met them at the edge of the ballroom, her face pale. We should go before this gets worse. It's already worse, Lillian said, but she let Catherine guide her toward the exit. As they retrieved their cloaks and waited for the carriage, Lillian caught sight of herself in a mirror. Her face was flushed, her eyes too bright. She looked like she'd been in a fight. She had been in a fight, and for the first time in her marriage, she'd won. The scandal broke the next morning. Lillian woke to Catherine standing over her bed, holding a newspaper with a grim expression. You need to see this, she said. The headline was everything Lillian had feared, Duchess Hale and the Frozen Duke, a marriage in shambles. Below it, a gleefully detailed account of last night's confrontation, complete with speculation about her relationship with Marcus and questions about whether a formal separation was in the works. Well, Lillian said, setting down the paper. That's unfortunate. Unfortunate? Catherine looked at her like she'd grown a second head. Lillian, this is a disaster. Half of London thinks you're having an affair. The other half thinks you're a hysterical wife who can't handle your husband's coldness. Neither version is good for you. What would you have me do? Issue a retraction? Apologize? I'd have you think about the consequences. You've made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in England. He won't let this stand. Lillian got out of bed and went to the window. London was gray and drizzly this morning, matching her mood perfectly. He already didn't let me stand. I was nothing to him, Catherine. A signature on a marriage contract. At least now I'm something. You're something, all right. You're a scandal. A knock at the door interrupted them. Annie peeked in, looking worried. Begging your pardon, your grace, but there's a gentleman here to see you. Says his name is Mr. Thornwell, and he's the Duke of Ironridge's solicitor. Of course. Rowan was bringing in the lawyers already. Show him to the drawing room, Lillian said. I'll be down in 10 minutes. Catherine helped her dress, not in one of her new fashionable gowns, but in a severe dark blue dress that made her look older, more serious. If they were going to do this, Lillian would meet them on equal ground. Mr. Thornwell was exactly what she expected. Older, proper, utterly emotionless. He stood when she entered, bowing stiffly. Duchess Hale, thank you for seeing me. I don't recall having much choice. What does my husband want? Thornwell produced a document from his case. His Grace has instructed me to deliver this. It's a formal request for you to return to Ironridge Estate and resume your duties as his wife. And if I refuse? Then His Grace will be forced to take more drastic measures to protect the reputation of the Hale family. Lillian took the document and scanned it. Legal language, thick and impenetrable, but the message was clear. Come back or face consequences. What kind of measures? She asked. Thornwell looked uncomfortable for the first time. His Grace could petition for a legal separation on grounds of abandonment. Or he could cut off your allowance, leaving you financially dependent on other sources. Translation, he could make her life very difficult. Lillian set down the document and looked Thornwell straight in the eye. Tell His Grace that I'll return to Ironridge on one condition. Which is? That he asks me himself, in person. Without lawyers, without letters, without commands delivered through intermediaries. If he wants me back, he can come here and ask me like a human being. Thornwell blinked. I'm not sure that's... Those are my terms. Take them or leave them. Your Grace, I strongly advise you to reconsider. The Duke is not a patient man. Neither am I. Not anymore. Lillian stood, indicating the meeting was over. Good day, Mr. Thornwell. Please see yourself out. She left him standing there, probably scandalized, and went back upstairs. Her hands were shaking again, but not from fear this time. From exhilaration. She'd just called Rowan Hale's bluff, demanded that he treat her like a partner instead of property. There was no going back from this. Catherine was waiting in her room, looking impressed despite herself. You just made this 100 times more complicated, you know. I know. He might actually cut you off, leave you penniless. Then I'll find work. I'll survive. Lillian sat down at her writing desk, pulling out paper. I'm done bending, Catherine. If he wants me back, he's going to have to earn it. And if he doesn't? If he decides you're more trouble than you're worth and just leaves you in legal limbo forever? Lillian dipped her pen in ink, her hand steady now. Then at least I'll be free. She began to write. Not to Rowan, she'd said all she needed to say, but to Lord Pembroke, accepting his offer to join the board of his new women's education initiative, and to Charlotte Winters, agreeing to write an essay for her progressive journal about marriage reform. If society was going to talk about her anyway, she might as well give them something worth talking about. Outside, rain began to fall harder, drumming against the windows like 1,000 tiny fists. Lillian wrote until her hand cramped, planning, scheming, building something that couldn't be taken away. Rowan Hale had taught her invisibility. Now she was going to teach him what it meant to be seen. What? The response came 3 days later, and it wasn't what she expected. Rowan didn't send another lawyer. He didn't cut off her money. He didn't issue threats or ultimatums. He sent a single card delivered by his own footman with 5 words written in his sharp, precise hand. Tomorrow, 4 o'clock. Please. That last word stopped her cold. Rowan Hale didn't say please. Ever. It's a trap, Marcus said when she showed him the card. They were having tea at his townhouse, carefully chaperoned by his younger sister to avoid more scandal. He's going to try to manipulate you, make promises he won't keep. Maybe. But I have to hear what he has to say. Why? You don't owe him anything. No, but I owe myself the truth, whatever that is. Lillian folded the card carefully. Besides, I told him he had to ask in person. I can't back down now. Marcus looked worried, but he nodded. Then I'm coming with you, as a witness. That'll just make him angry. Good. Let him be angry. I'm not letting you face him alone. In the end, Catherine came too, setting up in a nearby drawing room just in case. Lillian felt like she was preparing for battle, which wasn't far from the truth. At precisely 4 o'clock, Rowan Hale arrived at Catherine's townhouse. He looked different, still imposing, still coldly handsome, but there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. His clothes were slightly rumpled, as if he'd been traveling hard. He'd come straight from Iron Ridge. For her. Duchess, he said, bowing. His eyes flicked to Marcus, standing protectively at Lillian's side, and something dark crossed his face. Lord Ashford. How expected. Your Grace, Marcus replied coolly. If you gentlemen are finished posturing, Lillian said, perhaps we could get on with this. You wanted to speak with me, Rowan. So speak. Rowan's jaw clenched. Alone. No, this is a private matter between husband and wife. We don't have that kind of relationship. You made sure of that. Lillian sat down, folding her hands in her lap. Marcus stays. Now, what did you come here to say? For a long moment, Rowan just stood there, clearly struggling with something. Finally, he said, I want you to come back to Iron Ridge. Why? Because you're my wife. That's not a reason. That's a legal status. Try again. Rowan's eyes flashed with anger, but he kept his voice controlled. Because your absence is causing scandal. The Hale name is being dragged through the mud. Stop. Lillian held up a hand. If you came here to lecture me about reputation and duty, you've wasted your time. I don't care about scandal. I don't care about the Hale name. The only thing I care about is whether you can give me one honest reason why I should give up the life I've built here and go back to being invisible. You weren't invisible. I was a ghost! The words exploded out of her, months of pain and anger finally breaking free. I was nothing to you. You married me and then pretended I didn't exist. You locked me away in that freezing estate and never once asked if I was happy, or lonely, or slowly dying inside. And now you show up here, after I've finally found people who actually see me, and you expect me to come running back? For what? So you can ignore me more conveniently? Rowan looked like she'd slapped him. Good. I didn't know you were unhappy, he said quietly. You didn't care enough to find out. Silence fell, heavy and terrible. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, probably wishing he'd stayed in the other room after all. Rowan took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, rougher, more real. You're right, he said. I was cruel. I thought if I kept my distance, if I didn't let myself care, it would be easier for both of us. Easier than what? Than this. He gestured vaguely between them. Then actually trying. Then risking. Risking what, Rowan? What are you so afraid of? But he just shook his head, walls slamming back into place. Come back to Iron Ridge. I'll be better. I'll try. Try how? By speaking to me once a week instead of never? By allowing me to eat dinner in the same room? I don't know. The admission seemed to cost him something. I don't know how to do this, Lillian. I never learned. But I'm willing to try if you'll just give me another chance. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to her, and it still wasn't enough. No, Lillian said softly. I'm sorry, but no. I need more than your willingness to try. I need proof that you see me as a person, not a problem to be managed. And until you can give me that, I'm staying in London. Rowan's face hardened. Then you leave me no choice. What does that mean? It means I tried to do this the right way. You refused, so now I'll do what I should have done months ago. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Enjoy your independence while it lasts, Duchess. It won't be for much longer. He was gone before she could respond, the door slamming with a finality that made her jump. Marcus immediately moved to her side. What was that? What's he planning? I don't know. But Lillian's hands were shaking again, and this time it was from fear. She'd pushed Rowan Hale too far. And now she was going to pay for it. The attack came from a direction Lillian never expected. 2 days after Rowan's threat, she woke to find her bank account frozen. Not reduced, completely inaccessible. When she tried to withdraw money for household expenses, the banker looked at her with something between pity and embarrassment. I'm terribly sorry, Your Grace, but the Duke of Ironridge has invoked his legal right to control all marital assets. Without his written permission, I cannot release any funds. Lillian felt the ground shift beneath her feet. That's not possible. I have my own allowance, which comes from the ducal estate, ma'am. Legally, it belongs to your husband. He's well within his rights. She stumbled out of the bank into the gray London morning, her mind racing. Rowan had cut her off, completely. She had maybe 20 pounds in her reticule and nothing else. Catherine was furious when Lillian told her. That bastard, that absolute bastard. He's trying to starve you out. It's working. Lillian's voice was hollow. I can't pay Annie's wages. I can't contribute to the household expenses. I'm completely dependent on your charity. Which you have, obviously. But Lillian, Catherine's face was grim. I can house you, but I can't fund your social life. The dresses, the opera tickets, the charity donations, all of that costs money. Money you no longer have. So he's taken away my independence, my ability to exist in society. Exactly. He's betting you'll come crawling back rather than face poverty. Lillian sat down heavily, her mind churning. This was worse than she'd anticipated. Rowan wasn't just angry, he was strategic. He'd found the one lever that could actually force her hand. What am I going to do? She whispered. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then, you could fight him, legally. With what money? I can't afford a solicitor. Lord Pembroke might help. He's taken an interest in your situation. It was true. Since the ball, Pembroke had been surprisingly supportive, inviting her to dinners and introducing her to influential people. But asking him for money felt like admitting defeat. Let me think about it, Lillian said. She didn't have long to think. Quote, that afternoon, a letter arrived from Mrs. Hallowell at Ironridge. Lillian almost didn't open it. What could the housekeeper possibly want? But curiosity won out. The contents made her blood run cold. Your Grace, I write with grave news. The Duke has dismissed half the household staff, citing financial constraints due to your absence. 23 people have lost their positions, including several who have served the Hale family for decades. Annie's mother among them. His Grace has made it clear that further cuts will follow unless you return to resume your duties. The staff who remain are frightened and desperate. I do not presume to advise you, ma'am, but I thought you should know the consequences of your choices. Mrs. Hallowell. Lillian read it twice, her hand shaking with rage. This was calculated cruelty. Rowan knew she'd care about the servants, knew she'd feel responsible for their suffering. He was using innocent people as pawns to manipulate her. That son of a bitch, she said out loud. Catherine read the letter over her shoulder and swore colorfully. He's escalating, trying to make you the villain in this story. It's working. If I don't go back, those people will lose everything. But if I do go back, I lose everything. What about Marcus? Could he help with... No. Lillian's voice was sharp. I've already dragged him into enough of my mess. His mother was right. I'm toxic. Everyone near me gets burned. That's Rowan's doing, not yours. Does it matter? The result is the same. Lillian stood and began to pace. He's backed me into a corner. I either surrender and go back to being invisible, or I let innocent people suffer for my pride. It's not pride, it's survival. Is it? Or is it selfishness? The words tasted bitter. 23 people, Catherine. 23 families who did nothing wrong except work for a monster. You can't save everyone, Lillian. Maybe not, but I can't live with myself if I don't try. An idea was forming in her mind, a desperate, probably stupid idea, but it was the only card she had left to play. I need to see Pembroke, she said. Tonight. Lord Pembroke received her in his study, a room lined with books and smelling of old leather and pipe smoke. He listened without interrupting as Lillian explained her situation, the frozen accounts, the dismissed servants, Rowan's systematic dismantling of her independence. He's playing chess, Pembroke said when she finished, and he's several moves ahead of you. I know, that's why I need your help. What kind of help? Lillian took a deep breath. I want to petition Parliament for a legal separation, on grounds of cruelty and abandonment. Pembroke's eyebrows rose. That's bold and nearly impossible. The laws around marriage are not kind to women, even duchesses. I know, but you have influence, political connections. If anyone could make this happen, it's you. Even if I could, and that's a significant if, do you understand what you'd be facing? The scandal would be enormous. You'd be ostracized by half of society. Your reputation would be destroyed. My reputation is already destroyed. At least this way I'd be free. Pembroke studied her for a long moment. Why are you really doing this, Lillian? Is it about freedom or is it about revenge? The question hit harder than she expected. Was it revenge? Did she want to hurt Rowan the way he'd hurt her? Both, she admitted. Is that terrible? It's human. Pembroke pulled out a crystal decanter and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. Here, you look like you need this. The whiskey burned going down, but it steadied her nerves. Pembroke settled back in his chair, swirling his own glass thoughtfully. A legal separation would be a public battle, he said. Everything would come out. His neglect, your loneliness, the conditions at Iron Ridge. You'd have to testify before Parliament. Answer invasive questions about your marriage, your fidelity, your worthiness as a wife. I know. They'll paint you as hysterical, ungrateful, possibly insane. They'll say you're a woman who doesn't know her place. Let them. Pembroke's lips quirked. You've got steel in you, girl. I'll give you that. He set down his glass. All right, I'll help you. But on one condition. What? If we do this, we do it right. No half measures, no backing down when it gets ugly. You commit fully, or we don't start at all. Lillian didn't hesitate. I commit. Good. Then we begin tomorrow. Pembroke stood, offering his hand. Welcome to war, Duchess. I hope you're ready. As Lillian shook his hand, she thought about Rowan's cold gray eyes, his calculated cruelty, his absolute certainty that he could control her. I'm ready, she said. But the truth was, she had no idea what she was walking into. The petition was filed 3 days later, and London exploded. The newspapers had a field day. Duchess seeks separation from frozen Duke. Hail marriage scandal reaches Parliament. Is the Duchess mad or justified? Opinion was sharply divided. Some saw Lillian as a brave woman standing up to a cruel husband. Others saw her as a disobedient wife who didn't know her place. The editorials were vicious. She should be grateful for the security her marriage provides, one columnist wrote. Instead, she gallivants about London, embarrassing her husband and undermining the sanctity of marriage itself. Another took the opposite view. The Duke of Iron Ridge's treatment of his wife borders on imprisonment. If we allow men to treat their wives as property, what kind of society are we? The debate raged in drawing rooms and taverns across the city. Lillian couldn't go anywhere without being stared at, whispered about, judged. Marcus stopped by Catherine's townhouse, looking worried. Are you sure about this? The backlash is getting ugly. I'm sure. Lillian was drafting her testimony with Pembroke's solicitor, trying to find words to describe months of isolation without sounding pathetic. What choice do I have? Go back to Iron Ridge and disappear? You could negotiate. Find middle ground. There is no middle ground with Rowan. It's his way or nothing. Marcus sat down across from her, his expression serious. Lillian, there's something you should know. My mother has been lobbying against your petition. She's convinced several lords that you're mentally unstable. Lillian's pen stilled. Of course she has. She's scared I'll be called as a witness, that I'll be implicated in whatever this becomes. Will you be called as a witness? Probably. They'll want to question everyone you've associated with, looking for evidence of infidelity. There is no evidence. We're friends. I know that. You know that. But will Parliament believe it? Marcus ran a hand through his hair. This is going to get messy, Lillian. Messier than you think. He was right. She knew he was right, but turning back now would mean everything she'd endured had been for nothing. I can't stop, she said quietly. I've come too far. Marcus nodded slowly. Then I'll stand with you, whatever comes. You don't have to. Yes, I do. You're my friend. That means something. After he left, Lillian sat alone in the quiet drawing room, staring at her half-written testimony. The words blurred together. She was tired. So tired. And scared, though she'd never admit it out loud. What if she lost? What if Parliament sided with Rowan and forced her back to Iron Ridge? What if her gamble destroyed not just her life, but the lives of everyone who'd helped her? Second thoughts? Catherine stood in the doorway, her face sympathetic. Constantly, Lillian admitted. But I can't turn back. No, you can't. You're in too deep now. Catherine sat beside her. But Lillian, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that you might lose. Parliament rarely sides with wives against husbands. The law is designed to protect men's property rights, and you are still legally his property. Then the law is wrong. Agreed, but wrong doesn't mean it won't be enforced. Lillian looked down at her hands. They were ink-stained from writing, the nails bitten short from nerves. She'd stopped taking care with her appearance lately. What was the point when she couldn't afford new dresses anyway? What happens if I lose? She asked. Rowan will have the legal right to force you back to Iron Ridge, to control every aspect of your life. You'll have no recourse, no independence. You'll be completely at his mercy. That's what I thought. Lillian picked up her pen again. Then I'd better make sure I win. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out, giving both sides time to prepare their cases. Rowan hired the best lawyers in London, 3 of them, all known for their ruthless tactics. Lillian had Pembroke's solicitor, a kind older man named Mr. Davies, who'd handled divorce cases before but admitted this would be his most public trial yet. The key, Davies explained during one of their preparation sessions, is to prove systematic cruelty, not just neglect, but intentional harm. We need to show that the Duke of Iron Ridge deliberately created an environment so hostile that no reasonable woman could be expected to endure it. That shouldn't be hard. I have the facts. Facts are not the same as proof, Your Grace. We need witnesses, documentation, evidence that can't be dismissed as feminine hysteria or exaggeration. Lillian thought about the months at Iron Ridge, the locked doors, the refused audiences, the meals eaten alone. Who had witnessed any of it except servants too afraid to speak against their employer? What about Annie? She suggested. She saw everything. A maid's testimony will carry very little weight. We need someone of standing, someone whose word Parliament will respect. I don't have anyone like that. The only people who saw my marriage were Rowan's household staff, and he controls them all. Davies frowned. Then we'll have to build our case on your testimony alone, which means you need to be absolutely unimpeachable on the stand. No emotional outbursts, no crying, no anger, just calm, rational recitation of facts. While they call me insane and ungrateful. Exactly. Can you do that? Lillian thought about standing before a room full of powerful men, all of them convinced that women should be silent and obedient. Thought about recounting the worst months of her life while they judged whether her suffering was sufficient to justify breaking sacred marriage vows. I can do it, she said. She had to. A week before the hearing, Lillian attended what she knew would be her last society event for a while. Charlotte Winters had invited her to a salon at her home, a gathering of artists, writers, and radical thinkers who didn't care about scandal. The atmosphere was different from the formal balls Lillian had grown used to. People sat on cushions on the floor, arguing passionately about politics and art. Someone was playing guitar in the corner. The air smelled of wine and tobacco smoke. Lillian! Charlotte swept over, resplendent in a purple dress that would have scandalized half of London. I'm so glad you came. We've been following your case with great interest. Has the verdict been decided, then? Lillian tried to keep her tone light. In the court of public opinion? Absolutely. You're either a hero or a villain, depending on who you ask. Charlotte linked arms with her, guiding her through the crowded room. Personally, I think you're magnificent. Taking on the entire institution of marriage? That takes courage. Or stupidity. Often the same thing. Charlotte introduced her to a cluster of people debating women's property rights. Within minutes, Lillian was drawn into a heated discussion about legal reform, her nerves temporarily forgotten. This was what she'd been missing at Iron Ridge. Connection, intellectual challenge, the sense that her thoughts mattered. Later, as the evening wound down, Charlotte pulled her aside. I want to write about your case, for the journal, a first-person account of what it's like to fight for freedom within marriage. Lillian hesitated. That could make things worse. Give Rowan's lawyers ammunition. Or it could sway public opinion, show people that this isn't about one unhappy wife. It's about a system that treats women as property. Charlotte's eyes were intense. You have a platform right now, Lillian. People are paying attention. Use it. It was tempting, but also terrifying. Let me think about it, Lillian said. She was still thinking about it when she left the salon near midnight, her mind buzzing with wine and conversation. The streets were dark, lit only by occasional gas lamps. Catherine had sent the carriage for her, but it hadn't arrived yet. Lillian waited on the steps, wrapped in her cloak against the autumn chill. The city was quieter at this hour, just the distant sound of horses and the occasional laugh from a nearby tavern. She didn't hear the footsteps until they were right behind her. Lillian. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Rowan stood there, emerging from the shadows like a ghost. He looked terrible, haggard, his clothes rumpled, his eyes wild in a way she'd never seen before. He'd clearly been drinking. What are you doing here? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Waiting for you. We need to talk. We have nothing to say to each other, not until the hearing. Damn the hearing! Rowan took a step closer, and Lillian instinctively backed up against the door. Do you have any idea what you're doing? What this petition is costing? Costing you, you mean? Your reputation? Everything, his voice cracked. The estate, the tenants, the family name. It's all unraveling because you couldn't just be content with what you had. Content? I was dying, Rowan, slowly disappearing in that house while you pretended I didn't exist. I gave you everything. You gave me nothing. Money isn't the same as humanity. A title isn't the same as respect. They were shouting now, years of silence finally breaking open. Rowan's hands were clenched into fists, his face twisted with emotions he clearly didn't know how to process. I'm trying, he said, his voice dropping to something raw and desperate. I came here to tell you, I'll do whatever you want. Change however you need me to. Just withdraw the petition, please. It was the second time he'd said please. And this time it sounded like it was tearing him apart. Lillian wanted to feel triumph, victory. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? To make him beg. Instead, she just felt tired. It's too late, she said quietly. You can't undo 8 months of cruelty with one desperate plea. Then what do you want from me? Tell me what I can do to fix this. Nothing. There's nothing you can do. She saw the carriage turning the corner and felt relief flood through her. Goodbye, Rowan. I'll see you at the hearing. Lillian, wait. But she was already moving, practically running down the steps to the waiting carriage. She climbed inside without looking back, her whole body shaking. As the carriage pulled away, she caught one last glimpse of Rowan standing alone on the dark street, looking more lost than she'd ever seen him. For just a moment, she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and cold, matching Lillian's mood perfectly. She dressed with Catherine's help, a severe navy dress, her hair pulled back simply, no jewelry except her wedding ring. She needed to look respectable, stable, sane. You don't have to do this, Catherine said quietly as she fastened the buttons. Even now you could withdraw. And go back to Iron Ridge? Let Rowan win? Is that what this is about? Winning? Lillian met her aunt's eyes in the mirror. It's about surviving. I can't go back to being that ghost. I'd rather face Parliament than face that again. The carriage ride to Westminster felt surreal. London passed by outside the windows, people going about their normal lives, unaware that Lillian's entire future was about to be decided by a room full of men who'd never met her. Davies met her at the entrance, looking nervous. Remember what we discussed. Calm, rational, factual. Don't let them provoke you into emotion. I remember. Inside, the chamber was intimidating, all dark wood and soaring ceilings, with rows of stern-faced lords seated like judges. Rowan was already there, flanked by his lawyers. He looked composed now, every inch the Duke. When his eyes met hers, his expression was unreadable. The proceedings began with opening arguments. Rowan's lead lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Blackwood, painted a picture of an ungrateful wife who'd abandoned her duties to gallivant about London, embarrassing her husband and wasting his money. The Duchess of Ironridge was given every comfort, every luxury, Blackwood declared. Yet she chose to leave her husband's protection and associate with questionable characters, all while demanding financial support for her frivolous lifestyle. Lillian's nails bit into her palms, but she kept her face neutral. Davies's response was more subdued. My client seeks only what should be every woman's right, to live free from cruelty and isolation. The Duke of Ironridge systematically isolated his wife, denied her basic companionship, and created an environment so hostile that any reasonable person would flee it. Then came the testimony. Rowan went first, and Lillian had to admit he was good. He spoke calmly, reasonably, painting himself as a busy duke who'd perhaps been neglectful but never cruel. I provided my wife with her own apartments, staff, and a generous allowance, he said. If she was lonely, she never expressed it to me. I assumed she was content. Did you make any effort to spend time with your wife? One of the lords asked. My duties kept me occupied, but I never prevented her from seeking companionship. Within the estate? A pause. Yes, within the estate. So she was, in fact, confined to your property? For her safety, the winter roads were dangerous. Lillian wanted to scream. He was reframing everything, making months of imprisonment sound like reasonable caution. Then it was her turn. She walked to the witness stand on shaking legs, acutely aware of every eye in the room. This was it. Everything came down to the next hour. Davies began gently, establishing the basic facts of her marriage. The brief ceremony, the immediate isolation, the months of silence. In those 8 months at Ironridge, how many times did you speak with your husband? Lillian had to think. Perhaps 5 times. Never for more than a few minutes. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. 5 times in 8 months sounded bad even to sympathetic ears. And your meals? I took all my meals alone in my rooms, by His Grace's order. Did you request to dine with him? Initially, yes. I was told it was not permitted. Were you allowed to leave the estate? No, my lord. I was told the carriage was not available. For 8 months you were confined to the estate with no companionship, no conversation with your husband, and no means of leaving? Yes, my lord. More murmurs. Davies was building his case carefully, letting the facts speak for themselves. Then Blackwood stood for cross-examination, and Lillian knew this was where things would get ugly. Duchess Hale, he began, his tone dripping with false courtesy, you claim your husband isolated you, yet you had servants, did you not? Yes. A lady's maid, a housekeeper, footmen, stable boys, quite a large staff, in fact. They weren't permitted to speak with me beyond basic necessities. Permitted? Or perhaps they simply had no interest in befriending their employer's wife. Blackwood smiled coldly. You see, Your Grace, I suggest that your loneliness was not imposed, but rather a result of your own inability to adapt to your new station. That's not true. No? Then tell me, why did you never attend church services in the village? Surely that would have provided social interaction. I wasn't allowed. There is no record of your husband forbidding it. Perhaps you simply chose not to go? Lillian's temper flared. I asked repeatedly to visit the village. I was refused every time. By whom? Your husband? Or by servants who may have been following their own judgment about winter weather? It was a trap, and Lillian saw it too late. If she blamed the servants, she looked petty. If she insisted Rowan had given direct orders, she had no proof. Furthermore, Blackwood continued, not giving her time to recover, when you finally did leave Ironridge, where did you go? To London, to my aunt's home, where you immediately threw yourself into society, attending balls, opera performances, and salons. You made quite a name for yourself, didn't you? I was trying to build a life. With other men? Lord Ashford, for example, seems quite devoted to you. How many times did you dance with him that first night? That's irrelevant. Is it? You claim your husband neglected you, Yet the moment you gained freedom, you surrounded yourself with male attention. Perhaps your complaint isn't about isolation at all. Perhaps it's about wanting a different kind of companionship. How dare you? Davies was on his feet. Objection. This line of questioning is designed to impugn my client's character, not establish facts. But the damage was done. Lillian could see it in the Lord's faces, doubt creeping in. Was she a victim or an opportunist, a wronged wife or a woman looking for an excuse to break her vows? The questioning went on for another hour, each exchange feeling like a battle. Blackwood twisted everything, making her sound hysterical, ungrateful, possibly unstable. By the time they finally called a recess, Lillian felt like she'd been flayed alive. Davies pulled her aside, looking grim. That was rough. But you held your ground. Now we need to... Davies! One of the chamber assistants hurried over. You need to see this. It just came through. He handed over a document. Davies scanned it, and his face went pale. What? Lillian asked, fear spiking through her. What is it? Rowan's lawyers have submitted new evidence. Letters, apparently. Davies looked up at her, his expression serious. Between you and Lord Ashford. They're claiming they prove an illicit relationship. Lillian's world tilted. That's impossible. There are no such letters because there's no relationship. Are you certain? Have you and Lord Ashford never corresponded? Well, yes, but nothing... She stopped, her mind racing through their correspondence. Friendly notes, invitations to events, discussions about books and politics. Nothing romantic, but they could be taking things out of context, Davies said quietly, making innocent friendship look like something more. But that's lying. It's lawyering, and it might just work. The afternoon session began with Blackwood dramatically presenting the letters, reading them out loud in a tone that made every friendly phrase sound like a secret assignation. My dear Lillian, I so enjoyed our conversation yesterday. Your thoughts on the reform bill were fascinating, as always. I find myself looking forward to our next meeting with great anticipation. Innocent on its own. But the way Blackwood read it, with insinuation dripping from every word, it sounded like something else entirely. Marcus was called to testify, and Lillian watched in horror as they raked him over the coals. Was he in love with the Duchess? Had he encouraged her to leave her husband? Had they ever been alone together unchaperoned? We're friends, Marcus insisted, his face red. Nothing improper has ever occurred. Yet you spend a great deal of time together. You dance with her, escort her to events, write her letters. What would you call that if not courtship? I'd call it friendship. A friendship that began only after she left her husband. How convenient. It was masterful and devastating. By the time the session ended, the narrative had shifted. This wasn't about a cruel husband and a suffering wife anymore. It was about an unfaithful woman and her lover, trying to destroy a good man's reputation. Lillian walked out of the chamber feeling numb. Catherine was waiting, along with Marcus and Pembroke, all of them looking shaken. That was a disaster, Pembroke said bluntly. They've turned this into a question of your virtue, not Rowan's treatment of you. What do we do? Lillian asked. I don't know. Davies is conferring with the other lawyers, but... Pembroke shook his head. This doesn't look good, Lillian. I'm sorry. Marcus touched her arm. We'll figure something out. There has to be a way. There isn't. Lillian pulled away, suddenly overwhelmed. They've already decided. I can see it in their faces. They think I'm a whore trying to escape a perfectly reasonable marriage. Lillian, I need air. I need to... She turned and walked blindly down the corridor, pushing through a side door that led to a small courtyard. The evening air was cold, shocking her system. She leaned against the stone wall, trying to breathe, trying not to cry because crying meant they'd won. Footsteps behind her. She didn't turn around. You fought well today. Rowan's voice. Of course. Go away, she said, in a moment. First, I wanted to say... He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, softer. I'm sorry. Lillian turned slowly. Rowan stood a few feet away, his face unreadable in the twilight. You're sorry? She repeated. For what exactly? Destroying me in there? Using Marcus against me? Lying about letters that were nothing but friendship? I didn't know they'd do that. The letters. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that looked almost helpless. My lawyers, they went further than I authorized. And you didn't stop them. No, I didn't. He took a step closer. Because I'm desperate, Lillian. I'm losing everything, and I don't know how to stop it. You could withdraw your opposition. Let me go. I can't. Why not? Because... He stopped, seeming to struggle with something. Because you're right. About all of it. I was cruel. I isolated you. I treated you like property instead of a person. And now I'm doing it again, using legal weapons to force you back. I know all of that. Then why are you still fighting? Rowan looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something real in his eyes. Something that looked almost like pain. Because I don't know how to let you go, he said quietly, and I don't know how to be what you need. So I'm trapped between two impossible choices, and I'm taking everyone down with me. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to her, and it changed nothing. I'm sorry you're trapped, Lillian said, but I'm not going to be trapped with you. I'd rather lose everything than go back to Iron Ridge. Even your reputation, your friends, your entire future? Even that. They stood in silence, the cold autumn wind whipping around them. Two people bound by law and nothing else, destroying each other because neither knew how to surrender. The verdict will come tomorrow, Rowan said finally. Whatever happens, I hope you find what you're looking for. He turned and walked away, leaving Lillian alone in the courtyard as darkness fell around her. She didn't cry. She was past crying. Tomorrow Parliament would decide her fate, and no matter what they chose, her life as she'd known it was over. The only question was what would rise from the ashes. The morning brought fog so thick Lillian could barely see across the street from Catherine's townhouse. She stood at the window, still in her nightgown, watching the gray world outside and wondering if this was what the end looked like. You should eat something, Catherine said from the doorway. I'm not hungry. Lillian, what's the point? She turned to face her aunt. In a few hours, they're going to rule against me. I'll be legally forced back to Iron Ridge, my reputation destroyed, everyone who helped me implicated in scandal. So tell me, what exactly am I supposed to have an appetite for? Catherine crossed the room and took Lillian's hands. You don't know what they'll decide. Yes, I do. I saw their faces yesterday. They think I'm a liar and probably an adulteress. Rowan's lawyers destroyed me. Then we fight another way. There is no other way. I've lost. A knock at the door interrupted them. Annie peeked in, looking nervous. Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent. Tell them I'm not receiving... It's Mrs. Hallowell, ma'am, from Iron Ridge. Lillian froze. What? The housekeeper, Your Grace. She's come all the way from the estate. Says she needs to speak with you before the verdict. What could Mrs. Hallowell possibly want? The woman had never shown Lillian anything but cold disapproval. Still, curiosity won out. Show her in. Mrs. Hallowell looked different out of her usual black dress and severe expression. She was older than Lillian had realized, the journey clearly having taxed her. She clutched a leather satchel against her chest like it contained something precious. Mrs. Hallowell, Lillian said carefully, this is unexpected. Your Grace. The housekeeper's voice was stiff but not hostile. I apologize for the intrusion. I know I haven't been kind to you, but I need to show you something before it's too late. Eat. She set the satchel on the table and pulled out a stack of papers. Letters, Lillian realized, dozens of them. What are these? Mrs. Hallowell's hands trembled slightly. Letters from the late Duchess, Rowan's mother. She kept journals, correspondence, everything. I found them when I was clearing out her old rooms after she died. I've kept them locked away all these years because... She paused, seeming to struggle. Because they tell the truth about this family. About what the old Duke did to her. Lillian picked up one of the letters, scanning the elegant handwriting. It was dated nearly 30 years ago, addressed to someone named Margaret. I can't bear it anymore. He won't speak to me except to give orders. Won't look at me. I'm invisible in my own home. Sometimes I think I'm going mad. Is this what marriage is? This slow disappearance? The words hit Lillian like a physical blow. They could have been her own. She was isolated too, Lillian whispered. For 23 years, Mrs. Hallowell said quietly, the old Duke was a cruel man, drank heavily, gambled away fortunes, and blamed his wife for everything. She wasn't allowed friends, wasn't allowed to leave the estate. She had one son, Rowan, and she poured everything into him, tried to make him different from his father. Lillian flipped through more letters. The story they told was heartbreaking. A woman trapped in a loveless marriage, watching her husband destroy their estate and their family, powerless to stop it. Rowan saw everything. I try to shield him, but he's too clever. Last night, his father came home drunk and smashed every piece of my mother's china. Rowan helped me clean it up, never said a word. He's 13 years old and already learning to feel nothing. I'm failing him. When she died, Mrs. Hallowell continued, Rowan was 20. His father had just revealed the extent of the debts, nearly bankrupted the estate through gambling. Rowan spent the next year trying to save everything while his father drank himself to death. By the time the old Duke died, Rowan had turned into, she gestured vaguely, what he is now, hard, closed off, determined never to feel anything that might break him. So he became exactly like his father, Lillian said bitterly. No, his father was violent, cruel by nature. Rowan is... Mrs. Hallowell struggled for words. Afraid. He saw what love did to his mother, how it destroyed her, so he decided never to love at all. When the debts were paid and the estate stable, his steward suggested he marry for an heir. He chose you because you seemed safe, quiet, not demanding. A wife who wouldn't ask for what he couldn't give. Exactly. Mrs. Hallowell's eyes were sad. I watched him do to you exactly what his father did to his mother. And I said nothing because I thought that's just how things were. How marriage worked in families like ours. Lillian set down the letters, her mind racing. This changed everything. Not Rowan's actions. Those were still cruel, still inexcusable. But it explained them, showed the pattern repeating across generations. Why are you showing me this now? Because yesterday I heard what they did to you in that chamber, how they twisted your words, made you sound unstable and unfaithful. And I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore. Mrs. Hallowell squared her shoulders. These letters prove that the Hale family has a history of treating wives like prisoners. They show a pattern. If your lawyers present them to Parliament, it could change the verdict, Lillian finished. Show that Rowan was repeating learned behavior, not just being a busy duke. More than that, they show that this isn't about one woman being difficult. It's about a system that allows men to destroy their wives and call it marriage. Catherine had been reading over Lillian's shoulder, and now she looked up with sharp eyes. This is exactly what we need. Evidence of systematic abuse spanning generations. Even those old fossils in Parliament can't ignore this. But there's a cost, Mrs. Hallowell said quietly. If these become public, they'll destroy what's left of the Hale reputation. Rowan will be humiliated, and the Duchess, his mother, her private pain will be exposed for everyone to judge. Lillian thought about the woman who'd written those letters. A woman trapped just like she'd been trapped. A woman who died without ever finding freedom. She'd want this, Lillian said softly. She'd want to save other women from the same fate. I believe so too. That's why I brought them. Mrs. Hallowell gathered the letters carefully. But I leave the decision to you, Your Grace. Use them or don't. Either way, I've done what I should have done years ago, told the truth. After she left, Lillian and Catherine sat in silence, staring at the pile of letters. Davies needs to see these immediately, Catherine finally said. The session starts in 2 hours. Wait. Lillian picked up one more letter, dated just before the old Duchess died. Listen to this. I failed as a mother. I tried to teach Rowan that love isn't weakness, but he's seen too much. He'll never open his heart, but perhaps someday he'll meet someone brave enough to break through those walls, someone who refuses to disappear the way I did. If she exists, I hope she knows. It's not her fault. The damage was done long before she arrived. Lillian's throat tightened. The old Duchess had known, had understood what her son would become, and tried to warn his future wife. She was talking about you, Catherine said gently. She was talking about any woman unlucky enough to marry into this family. Lillian stood, decision crystallizing. Get Davies. We're presenting this evidence. All of it. Rowan will never forgive you. Good. Maybe that will finally make us even. Yeah. The chamber was already filling when they arrived, spectators cramming into every available space. News of the scandalous case had spread, and everyone wanted to witness the verdict. Davies nearly dropped the letters when Lillian handed them over. Where did you get these? Does it matter? Can you use them? He scanned through them quickly, his expression shifting from shock to something like hope. This is, Your Grace, this changes everything. If I can get the lords to admit this as evidence, then do it, whatever it takes. The session opened with the lords announcing they'd deliberated overnight and were prepared to issue a preliminary ruling. But Davies was on his feet immediately, interrupting. My lords, I have new evidence that directly relates to this case. Evidence that shows a pattern of abuse spanning 2 generations of the Hale family. Rowan's lawyers objected immediately, but the presiding lord held up a hand. What kind of evidence, Mr. Davies? Letters and journals from the late Duchess of Ironridge, Rowan Hale's mother, documenting years of isolation, emotional cruelty, and systematic abuse at the hands of her husband, behavior that was then replicated by her son toward my client. The chamber erupted. Rowan shot to his feet, his face white. Those are private family documents. They have no place in these proceedings. They have every place, Davies countered. They established that the Duke of Ironridge's treatment of his wife was not mere neglect, but a deliberate continuation of abusive patterns learned from his father. The presiding lord looked intrigued. I'll allow it, but make it quick, Mr. Davies. We've indulged enough drama in this case already. Davies began reading selected passages from the old Duchess's letters. The chamber fell silent as her words painted a picture of decades of suffering. A woman trapped, isolated, slowly erased by a husband who treated her as property. Lillian watched Rowan as his mother's private pain was exposed to public scrutiny. His face had gone from white to gray, his hands clenched so tight on the table that his knuckles showed bone white. She should have felt satisfaction. Revenge. This was what she'd wanted, to make him hurt the way he'd hurt her. Instead, she just felt hollow. When Davies finished reading, the silence was absolute. Even Blackwood looked shaken. Your Grace, the presiding lord addressed Rowan directly, did you know about these letters? No. Rowan's voice was barely audible. Did you know about your father's treatment of your mother? A long pause. Then, yes. And yet you repeated the same behavior with your own wife. Rowan closed his eyes. I thought if I kept my distance, if I didn't let myself care, it would be different, better. I wouldn't become my father. Instead, you became exactly what you feared, the Lord said quietly. Yes. The admission hung in the air. Lillian found herself standing without quite meaning to, drawn forward by something she didn't understand. Rowan, she said. He looked at her, and the expression on his face was pure devastation. Did you love your mother? She asked. Yes. Did you know what your father was doing to her? His voice cracked. I was a child. I didn't understand. By the time I was old enough to help, she was already... He stopped, unable to continue. Already broken, Lillian finished gently. Like you tried to break me. I didn't want to break you. I wanted to protect you. From me. From this. He gestured helplessly at the chamber, the scandal, everything. I thought if I stayed away, if I never let you close enough to hurt, you'd be safe. Safe? Lillian's voice sharpened. You locked me in a prison and called it safety. You erased me and called it protection. That's not love, Rowan. That's not even kindness. That's just fear dressed up as duty. I know. The words were barely a whisper. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The chamber was watching them like it was theater. Which it was, in a way. But for the first time, Lillian didn't care about the audience. Your apology doesn't undo 8 months of cruelty, she said. It doesn't give me back the person I was before Ironridge, but at least it's honest. At least it's real. She turned to the presiding lord. I'd like to make a statement, if I may. Proceed, Duchess. Lillian took a breath, gathering her thoughts. My lords, when I filed this petition, I wanted freedom. I wanted to escape a marriage that was killing me piece by piece, and I still want that. But these letters from the late Duchess have shown me something else. That this isn't just about me and Rowan. It's about every woman who's been trapped in a marriage like this. Every wife who's been isolated, ignored, erased. She looked directly at the lords, meeting their eyes one by one. You have the power to change that. Not just for me, but for all the women who will come after. You can rule that marriages built on cruelty and control are not sacred. That women are not property. That we have the right to exist as full human beings, not shadows in our husbands' houses. Duchess Hale, the presiding lord said carefully, are you asking us to grant your separation? I'm asking you to acknowledge that what happened to me, what happened to the late Duchess, is wrong. Whether you grant the separation or not, I need you to say that. I need it on record that treating wives like prisoners is unacceptable. The lords conferred among themselves, their voices too low to hear. Lillian stood waiting, her heart pounding. She'd said her piece. The rest was out of her hands. Finally, the presiding lord spoke. This case has been unusual and troubling. The evidence presented shows a clear pattern of abusive behavior spanning 2 generations. While we recognize that the Duke of Ironridge's actions were influenced by his upbringing, that does not excuse them. He paused, looking between Lillian and Rowan. However, we also recognize that marriage is a sacred institution. Dissolving it sets a dangerous precedent. Lillian's heart sank. They were going to deny it. After everything, they were still going to force her back. Therefore, the Lord continued, we grant a legal separation on grounds of cruelty and abandonment. The Duchess of Ironridge will retain her title and receive a separate household allowance, independent of her husband's control. The Duke of Ironridge will not be permitted to force his wife's return or restrict her movements. The chamber erupted. Lillian couldn't breathe. Had she heard that correctly? Furthermore, the Lord raised his voice over the noise, we recommend that Parliament review current marriage laws to better protect women from similar situations. The treatment documented in this case should not be legal. It should not be tolerated, and it will not be permitted to continue. The gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the room. Lillian had won. She'd actually won. Catherine was suddenly there, pulling her into a fierce embrace. Davies was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. Even Pembroke looked surprised and pleased. But Lillian's eyes were on Rowan. He sat alone at his table, abandoned by his lawyers who'd already started packing their cases. He looked smaller somehow, defeated. She should have felt triumph, victory. She'd beaten the Duke of Ironridge, exposed his cruelty, claimed her freedom. Instead, she just felt tired. Indeed. The celebration at Catherine's townhouse that evening was subdued. Oh, people came. Marcus, Charlotte, Pembroke, half a dozen others who'd supported Lillian through the trial. But she couldn't quite join the festive mood. You did it, Marcus said, handing her champagne. You actually did it. You're free. Am I? Lillian looked at the glass without drinking. I'm legally separated, not divorced. I can't remarry, can't inherit property in my own right. I'm just in limbo. Better limbo than Ironridge, but still. It's a start. You heard what they said. They're reviewing the marriage laws because of you. Because of the old Duchess. Her words, her suffering. I just delivered them. Marcus sat beside her, lowering his voice. Are you all right? You don't seem happy. I don't know what I am. Lillian finally took a sip of champagne. It tasted flat. I thought winning would feel different, more complete. You're grieving. For what? A marriage that never existed? For what it could have been. For the person you thought you'd married. Marcus squeezed her hand. It's all right to mourn that, even while you celebrate freedom. Maybe he was right. Lillian had spent so long fighting that she hadn't thought about what came after victory. Now here she was, free and lost, and not entirely sure what to do with either feeling. The party continued around her, but she slipped away early, claiming exhaustion. In truth, she just needed silence. Space to think. She was preparing for bed when Annie knocked softly. "Your Grace, there's someone at the door for you. Says he won't leave until you speak with him." Lillian didn't need to ask who. "Tell him to go away." "I tried, ma'am. He's rather insistent." With a sigh, Lillian pulled on her dressing gown and went downstairs. Rowan stood in the entrance hall, still in his formal clothes from the hearing, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "What do you want?" she asked, too tired for politeness. "To talk, just for a few minutes. We have nothing left to say to each other. Please." There was that word again. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I need to explain." Against her better judgment, Lillian led him to the small drawing room. They sat on opposite ends of the sofa, the space between them feeling like miles. "Explain what?" she asked. "Why you treated me like furniture? Why you locked me away? Your lawyers already did that, blamed it on your traumatic childhood. They weren't wrong, but they weren't entirely right either." Rowan stared at his hands. "When my father died, I was relieved." "Is that terrible?" "I was relieved that he was finally gone, that he couldn't hurt my mother anymore. Except he'd already done all the damage. She died 6 months later. The doctor said it was her heart, but I knew better. She'd just given up." Lillian said nothing, letting him continue. "I swore I'd never do that to anyone, never trap someone in a marriage like theirs. So when the steward said I needed to marry for an heir, I thought I'd found a way around it. Marry someone, but keep my distance. Don't let myself care. Don't let them care about me. That way no one gets hurt." Except I did get hurt. Deeply. I know, and I have no excuse for it. I told myself you were content, that you didn't need more than I was giving. But the truth is, he finally looked at her. "I was a coward. I saw you, and you were kind and intelligent and everything my mother deserved in a daughter-in-law. And I panicked, because caring about you meant risking everything my father destroyed." "So you destroyed it preemptively?" "Yes." They sat in silence. Outside, London rattled on. Carriages, voices, life continuing oblivious to their small tragedy. "What happens now?" Rowan asked quietly. "I don't know. I have my separation, my freedom. You have your estate and your title. We go our separate ways. And if I said I wanted to try, to actually be what you needed?" Lillian looked at him, really looked. She saw the exhaustion, the fear, the genuine regret. She also saw the walls still firmly in place, the habits of a lifetime that wouldn't disappear overnight. "It's too late for that," she said gently. "You had 8 months to try. You chose not to." "I was afraid. I know, but your fear nearly destroyed me, Rowan. And I can't go back to that, not even for a husband who's finally learned to apologize." He nodded slowly, accepting the verdict. "Can I ask one thing?" "What?" "Don't hate me. I know that's selfish, but I couldn't bear it if you hated me." Lillian thought about hate. It would be easier in some ways, cleaner. But looking at Rowan now, this broken man who'd inherited his father's worst traits and his mother's suffering, she found she couldn't quite manage it. "I don't hate you," she said. "I pity you, and maybe someday I'll even forgive you. But I'll never trust you again. And without trust, there's nothing to build on." "I understand." Rowan stood and she walked him to the door. He paused on the threshold. "For what it's worth, you were right. About all of it. You deserved better than what I gave you." "Yes, I did." After he left, Lillian stood alone in the quiet house. Tomorrow, the newspapers would explode with the verdict. Her name would be on everyone's lips. Some praising her courage, others condemning her audacity. She'd be famous and infamous all at once. But tonight, she was just tired. She went upstairs, climbed into bed, and for the first time in a year, slept deeply. No nightmares of Iron Ridge. No fear of what tomorrow might bring. Just peace. Thought. The next weeks were a whirlwind. The verdict had indeed sparked exactly the public debate Lillian had hoped for. The newspapers were full of essays and editorials about marriage reform, women's rights, and the treatment of wives. Charlotte published Lillian's first-person account in her journal, and it sold out within hours. Other women began coming forward with their own stories, tales of isolation, cruelty, husbands who treated them as property. The movement Lillian had accidentally started was growing beyond her. Lord Pembroke invited her to join his education initiative officially, not just as a figurehead, but as an active board member. "You've proven you can fight," he said. "Now let's teach other women to do the same." Marcus remained a steadfast friend, though his mother still wouldn't speak to Lillian. That stung less than it might have before. She was learning to live with disapproval. The Duke of Ironridge, meanwhile, had retreated to his estate. Rumors said he'd dismissed his harsh lawyers and was quietly working to improve conditions for his tenants and staff. Whether that was genuine reform or damage control, Lillian didn't know. She tried not to think about him too much. One morning in late November, nearly 2 months after the verdict, Lillian received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Hallowell again, but this time with a different purpose. "Your Grace, I wanted to thank you for what you did. I should be thanking you. Your testimony turned the case." "Not just the case, the estate." Mrs. Hallowell settled into a chair, looking more relaxed than Lillian had ever seen her. "The Duke called a staff meeting last week, apologized for the dismissals, reinstated everyone with back wages. Then he did something I never thought I'd see. He asked us how to make Ironridge better. Wanted our input on everything from working conditions to household management." Lillian blinked in surprise. "He did?" "Shocked us all, but he seems different, like something broke open in him during that trial." Mrs. Hallowell pulled out a letter. "He asked me to give you this. I don't know what it says, but he seemed very intent that you receive it." After she left, Lillian sat staring at the sealed envelope for a long time. Part of her wanted to burn it unread. Another part, a part she didn't quite trust, was curious. Finally, she broke the seal. The letter was short, written in Rowan's precise hand. "Lillian, I won't insult you with more apologies. Words are cheap, and I've wasted too many already. Instead, I'm trying to show you through actions that I heard what you said, all of it. I've reinstated the dismissed staff. I've begun actually managing the estate instead of hiding from it. I'm meeting with tenants, listening to concerns, trying to be the Duke my mother hoped I'd become instead of the one my father made me. I'm also seeking help. There's a doctor in Edinburgh who specializes in what he calls disorders of the mind. He thinks my inability to feel, to connect. It's not weakness. It's damage that can be addressed. I don't know if he's right, but I'm trying. You were brave enough to demand better. The least I can do is try to become better. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to return or to suddenly believe I've changed. Change takes time, and I've only just begun. But I wanted you to know you didn't just free yourself, you freed me too. From patterns I didn't even realize I was following, from the ghost of my father, from the prison I'd built around my own heart. Thank you for refusing to disappear. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for being brave enough for both of us. Yours in gratitude, Rowan." Lillian read it twice, then set it aside with shaking hands. She didn't know what to do with this information, didn't know if she should believe it or dismiss it as another manipulation. But something in the letter's tone, the lack of pleading, the simple acknowledgement of harm done, felt real. "What are you going to do?" Catherine asked when Lillian showed her the letter. "Nothing. What can I do? We're legally separated. He's at Ironridge. I'm here. That's how it stays." "You could write back." "And say what? Good luck with your therapy?" Catherine smiled. "Or you could say thank you for trying, even if it's too late." Lillian thought about that, about the man who'd written those words, not the Duke who'd locked her away, but the person underneath, the one who'd watched his mother suffer and learned all the wrong lessons. Maybe he was trying. Maybe he'd fail, but at least he was trying. That night she wrote a short reply. "Rowan, I'm glad you're seeking help. I'm glad you're trying to break the patterns. Your tenants and staff deserve a better Duke, and you deserve a better life than the one your father modeled. I won't return to Ironridge. That chapter of my life is closed, and I need to move forward without looking back. But I want you to know, I don't hate you. I hope you find whatever peace you're looking for. Lillian." She sent it before she could second-guess herself. Whether anything would come of it, she didn't know. But for the first time since leaving Iron Ridge, she felt like maybe, just maybe, both of them had a chance at becoming whole again. Not together. That ship had sailed and sunk, but separately, as two people learning to survive the damage of their past and build something better from the rubble. It wasn't the ending she'd imagined, but it was honest. And honest, Lillian was learning, was sometimes better than happy. Winter arrived early that year, bringing snow that blanketed London in white silence. Lillian watched it fall from the window of her new office, a small but respectable space in Bloomsbury where the Women's Education Initiative had set up headquarters. It had been 6 months since the verdict, 6 months of building something real from the rubble of her broken marriage. The work was hard, harder than she'd expected. They were trying to establish schools for girls across England, fighting resistance from parents who saw no value in educating daughters, from towns that wouldn't provide buildings, from a society that believed women's minds were too delicate for serious study. But slowly, painfully, they were making progress. "Your Grace?" Miss Edwards, her assistant, poked her head in. "The delegation from Manchester is here." Lillian set down her pen. "Send them in." 3 women entered, all middle-aged, all wearing the determined expressions of people who'd traveled far for a purpose. The leader, a stout woman named Mrs. Brennan, got straight to the point. "We read about your case, Duchess, about what you did, and we thought, if she can stand up to Parliament and win, maybe we can stand up to our town council." "What do you need?" Lillian asked. "A school. We have 30 girls ready to attend, parents willing to pay modest fees, but the council won't approve it, says education makes women difficult." Lillian smiled grimly. "How familiar? Tell me about your town council." Over the next hour, they strategized. Lillian had learned a lot in 6 months: how to navigate bureaucracy, how to apply pressure through the right channels, how to make men who didn't want to listen suddenly find your voice impossible to ignore. By the time the women left, they had a plan. And Lillian had another school added to her growing list of small victories. "You're good at this," Miss Edwards observed after they'd gone. "Better than Lord Pembroke, even." "Lord Pembroke has the connections. I just have the anger." "Whatever it is, it's working." Was it? Some days Lillian wasn't sure. The schools were opening, 5 so far, with 10 more in planning, but the resistance was constant, exhausting, and the personal cost was high. She'd lost friends. People who'd supported her during the separation now found her work too radical, too political. Even Marcus had grown distant, his mother having finally convinced him that association with Lillian would damage his prospects. It hurt more than she wanted to admit. But she had new friends, too. Women like Charlotte, who understood what it meant to fight for a place in the world. Women from all walks of life who saw in Lillian's story an echo of their own struggles. And she had purpose. That counted for something. The letter arrived on a gray December morning, delivered by a private courier. Lillian recognized the Iron Ridge seal immediately and felt her stomach clench. She and Rowan had maintained a distant correspondence over the months, polite, formal letters about estate business and legal matters. Nothing personal. Nothing that required her to think about him as anything other than the husband she'd escaped. But this letter felt different, heavier somehow. She broke the seal. "Lillian, I'm writing to inform you of a decision I've made. After much consideration and consultation with my solicitors, I've decided to petition Parliament for a full divorce." Lillian's hands shook. She read the sentence 3 times to make sure she'd understood. Divorce. Not legal separation. Actual divorce. "I know this will cause scandal. Divorced women face even more social censure than separated ones, but you deserve the freedom to remarry if you choose, to build a life completely independent of me. I should have done this months ago, but I was still holding on to, I don't know, hope? Control? The illusion that someday we might find our way back to each other? But I've realized that's not fair to you. You've moved on. You're building something important, something that matters. And I'm still at Iron Ridge, trying to undo decades of damage. We're on different paths. We need to be free to walk them without the weight of a dead marriage holding us back. My solicitors will contact you to arrange the details. I'll claim responsibility for the breakdown, cite my own neglect and cruelty. There should be no stain on your reputation beyond what already exists. I hope this gives you what you've been fighting for, true freedom." Rowan Lillian set down the letter with trembling hands. Divorce. After everything, he was giving her what she'd wanted all along. So why did she feel like crying? What is it? Catherine had come in without Lillian noticing. Rowan is filing for divorce. Catherine's eyebrows rose. That's good, isn't it? That's what you wanted. Yes, it is. It's exactly what I wanted. Lillian pressed her hands to her face. So why does it feel like an ending? Because it is an ending, the final one. Catherine sat beside her. You've been in limbo for months. Now it's real, final. No more what-ifs or maybes. I don't have any what-ifs left. Don't you? Lillian looked at her aunt sharply. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Catherine said carefully, that Rowan has been writing to you for 6 months, telling you about the changes at Iron Ridge, the work he's doing, the help he's seeking, and you've been writing back. Polite correspondence, nothing more. Are you sure? Because I've seen how you read his letters. You're not indifferent, Lillian. You're something else. Maybe angry, maybe sad, maybe, curious? Curious about what? About whether people can actually change, whether the damage can be undone. Catherine squeezed her hand. I'm not saying you should forgive him. I'm not even saying he deserves forgiveness. But I'm saying you might want to ask yourself what you're feeling before this divorce becomes final and you lose the chance to figure it out. After Catherine left, Lillian sat alone with the letter. She thought about the last 6 months, about the quiet, steady stream of information from Iron Ridge, staff reinstated, tenant conditions improved, the estate slowly transforming from a prison into something livable. She told herself she didn't care, that Rowan's journey toward becoming a better person was his business, not hers. But some part of her had been paying attention, noting the changes, wondering if they were real or just another performance. And now he was offering divorce, setting her completely free. The man who'd once controlled every aspect of her life was giving up all claim to her. That should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like loss. Lillian threw herself into work, trying not to think about the divorce proceedings that were grinding forward with bureaucratic slowness. Christmas came and went. The new year arrived with its usual mix of hope and hangovers. And then, in late January, everything changed again. She was reviewing architectural plans for the 7th school when Miss Edwards rushed in, her face pale. Your Grace, you need to see this. She thrust a newspaper at Lillian. The headline made Lillian's blood run cold. Fire at Iron Ridge Estate. Duke missing. Her eyes flew over the article. The East Wing had caught fire 3 nights ago. Most of the staff evacuated safely, but the Duke had gone back in to make sure everyone was out. There'd been some confusion, smoke, flames. He hadn't emerged. They'd searched the rubble for 2 days, no body yet, but the East Wing was completely destroyed. The chances of survival were— No, Lillian whispered. Your Grace? Get my cloak, and tell the driver to prepare the carriage immediately. Where are we going? Iron Ridge. The journey took 2 days of hard travel. Lillian barely slept, her mind churning with thoughts she didn't want to examine too closely. Rowan might be dead. The man she'd hated, pitied, almost forgiven, gone. And the last thing she'd sent him was a polite, distant letter about legal proceedings. The guilt was overwhelming. When the carriage finally pulled up to Iron Ridge, the damage was immediately visible. The entire East Wing, her old prison, was a blackened skeleton against the winter sky. Smoke still rose from parts of it. Staff were everywhere, moving with organized purpose. Mrs. Hallowell saw Lillian and hurried over, looking exhausted. Your Grace, we didn't expect— Where is he? Lillian demanded. The newspaper said he was missing, but he's alive. Mrs. Hallowell's face softened. Injured, but alive. They found him yesterday, unconscious in the rubble. He'd gone back for one of the maids who panicked and hid. Got her out. But a beam fell before he could escape himself. Relief flooded through Lillian so powerfully she had to grab the carriage for support. Where is he? In his chambers. The doctor said— Lillian was already moving, practically running through the familiar halls. Past the gallery, where Rowan had once walked right past her, past the study where he'd told her to go away. up the stairs to the west wing where she'd never been permitted to enter. His door was open. She stopped in the doorway, breathing hard. Rowan lay in bed, his face pale against white pillows. Bandages wrapped his head and left arm. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but steady. He looked nothing like the cold, untouchable Duke who'd condemned her to invisibility. He looked human, vulnerable, mortal. "You can go in," a voice said behind her. The doctor, a kind-faced older man. "He's been asking for you, actually. Keep saying your name when the laudanum wears off." Lillian's throat tightened. Is he going to be all right? The burns aren't too severe, and the head wound is healing, but he breathed in a lot of smoke. The next few days will tell. The doctor paused. He saved that girl's life, you know. Annie, I think her name was, could have escaped easily if he'd left her behind. Annie. Of course, Rowan had gone back for Annie. Lillian entered the room slowly, pulling a chair beside the bed. Up close, she could see the extent of the damage, burns on his hands, a nasty gash along his temple, bruises everywhere. He'd almost died, and she'd almost lost the chance to, what, forgive him? Tell him the separation was enough? That she understood he was trying? She didn't know. She reached out carefully and took his uninjured hand. It was warm, solid, real. "Don't you dare die," she whispered. "Not now. Not when you finally started figuring things out." His fingers twitched in hers. His eyes fluttered open. Those ice-gray eyes that had once looked through her like she was glass. Now they focused on her face with something like wonder. "Lillian?" His voice was rough, barely audible. "You're really here?" "I'm really here. I thought I was hallucinating. The smoke." He coughed, wincing. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe. The structure might still collapse." "Shut up," she said, but gently. "I'm not leaving." "Why?" "I gave you the divorce. You're free. You don't owe me anything." "I know I don't." Lillian squeezed his hand. "I'm not here out of obligation. I'm here because I needed to know you were all right." "Why?" he asked again, his eyes searching her face. It was a fair question. Why had she come? What was she doing here, holding the hand of the man who'd hurt her so badly? "Because," she said slowly, working it out as she spoke, "somewhere in the last 6 months, I stopped seeing you as the enemy. You're not my husband anymore. Not really. But you're also not nothing. You're someone who's trying. Someone who went back into a burning building to save my maid. Someone who's attempting to break patterns that have defined your family for generations. Attempting and mostly failing. Attempting is enough, more than I ever got before." They sat in silence, her hand in his. Outside, servants worked to stabilize what was left of the East Wing. Inside, something between them was shifting into new territory neither of them understood. "The girl," Rowan said finally. "Annie, is she?" "She's fine, scared but unharmed." "Good. That's good." He closed his eyes. "I couldn't leave her. I kept thinking, what if it had been my mother? What if someone had saved her from my father's house all those years ago? Would she have survived? Lived? You can't change the past." "No. But I can try not to repeat it." He looked at her again. "You taught me that. You refused to be my mother, to suffer in silence and disappear. You fought, and in fighting you showed me there was another way." Lillian felt tears prick her eyes. "You almost died learning that lesson. Worth it. If it means I'm finally becoming the man I should have been all along." His hand tightened on hers. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. But I want you to know you changed everything. You changed me." "People don't change that easily." "No, they don't. It's hard and messy, and I fail constantly. But I'm trying. Every day, I'm trying." The doctor returned, shooing Lillian out so Rowan could rest. She went reluctantly, looking back at the bed where her husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, lay recovering from wounds he'd earned saving someone else. Mrs. Hallowell was waiting in the hallway. "Will you be staying, Your Grace?" Would she? The smart thing would be to return to London, to her work, to the life she'd built. Rowan was alive. That was all she'd needed to know. But something kept her rooted in place. Just for a few days, she heard herself say. Until I'm sure he's out of danger. Those few days turned into a week. Then 2. Lillian told herself she was staying because Rowan's recovery was slow, because the estate was in chaos and needed someone to help organize the rebuilding. Both true, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was harder to articulate. She was curious about the man Rowan was becoming, about whether the changes were real or temporary, about what it meant that he'd risked his life for a servant girl he barely knew. And maybe, though she barely admitted this even to herself, she was curious about whether something could be salvaged from the wreckage of their marriage. Not the old marriage. That was dead, cremated in the flames that took the East Wing. But something new. Something built on honesty instead of duty, on choice instead of obligation. She watched Rowan heal, watched him work with architects to rebuild the damaged wing, this time with better ventilation, more light, rooms designed for comfort instead of isolation. Watched him meet with staff, asking their opinions, actually listening to their answers. Watched him struggle with nightmares about the fire, about his mother, about all the damage he'd done and couldn't undo. One evening, nearly 3 weeks after the fire, she found him in the rebuilt library, staring at a portrait of his parents. I want to take it down, he said without looking at her. Every time I see his face, I remember what he did to her, what I almost did to you. Then take it down. It's tradition, the previous Duke and Duchess displayed in the place of honor. Tradition, Lillian said, coming to stand beside him, is just another word for repeating the past. If you're serious about breaking patterns, start here. He looked at her, something vulnerable in his expression. Will you help me? Together, they took down the portrait. It was heavier than it looked, the frame gilded and ornate. They carried it down to the cellar, storing it away in darkness where it couldn't hurt anyone anymore. In its place, Rowan hung a landscape, rolling hills and open sky, painted by his mother in one of her rare moments of happiness. Better, Lillian said. Much better. They stood in the library, surrounded by books and firelight, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Iron Ridge as a bride, the house felt almost warm. Lillian, Rowan said quietly, the divorce is still happening, she finished, unless you've changed your mind. No, I haven't changed my mind. You deserve freedom, whether from me or just from the weight of a bad marriage. But I wanted to ask. He hesitated, then continued. After it's final, after we're no longer bound by law or duty, would you consider starting over? Starting over? Not as husband and wife, we ruined that already, but as, I don't know, friends, acquaintances, 2 people who share a history and might build a future? Lillian's heart was pounding. This was dangerous territory. She'd fought so hard for independence. Going back to Rowan in any capacity felt like surrender. But was it surrender if she chose it freely? If there were no obligations, no legal chains? I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know if we can have any kind of relationship after everything that's happened. I understand. It was too much to ask. But, she continued, I'm willing to find out. After the divorce, after we've both had time to become people who exist independently, maybe then we can see if there's anything worth building. Rowan's face transformed. Not into happiness exactly. They were both too damaged for that. But into something like hope. Thank you, he said. That's more than I deserve. Yes, it is. Don't make me regret it. I'll try not to. Lillian returned to London in late February as the divorce proceedings were reaching their conclusion. The scandal had died down somewhat. People had moved on to newer gossip. But her return to Iron Ridge had sparked fresh rumors. They're saying you've reconciled, Charlotte told her over tea, that you're going back to him. I'm not going back to anything. The divorce is proceeding as planned. But you spent 3 weeks at Iron Ridge, helping with recovery efforts, that's all. Charlotte's look was skeptical. Is it? Was it? Lillian didn't know anymore. The lines had blurred somewhere between holding Rowan's hand in his sickbed and taking down his parents' portrait, between helping rebuild the East Wing and having actual conversations about what they both wanted from life. She cared about him. She could admit that now. Not the way she'd cared when she first married him. That had been naive hope mixed with duty. This was something more complicated, more real. But caring wasn't the same as trust, and trust took time. The divorce was finalized in March on a gray, rainy day that matched Lillian's mood. She signed the papers in Davy's office, watched the solicitor apply his seal, and that was it. She was no longer the Duchess of Iron Ridge. She was just Lillian Vance again, free, unmarried, unclaimed. "How do you feel?" Davies asked gently. "I don't know," Lillian admitted, "like I've won and lost at the same time. That's the nature of these things, I'm afraid. Freedom always costs something." She walked out of the office into the rain, letting it soak through her cloak. She'd done it. Fought Parliament, won her separation, survived the scandal, and finally achieved full legal freedom. So why did she feel so empty? "Lillian!" She turned. Marcus was hurrying down the street, holding an umbrella. "Marcus, I thought you were avoiding me these days." He winced. "I was. My mother's been insufferable, but I heard the divorce was finalized today, and I needed to make sure you were all right. I'm fine." "You're standing in the rain without an umbrella. That's not fine." Despite everything, Lillian smiled. "Fair point." They took shelter in a nearby tea shop, and Marcus ordered them both something hot and strong. They sat in silence for a while, watching the rain streak down the windows. "I'm sorry," Marcus said finally, "for pulling away, for letting my mother's fears matter more than our friendship. You had your reasons. Cowardly reasons. Human reasons." Lillian wrapped her hands around her teacup. "I don't blame you, Marcus. This was always going to cost friendships. I knew that going in." "Was it worth it?" She thought about the question, about the months of fighting, the scandal, the isolation, about finding herself again after nearly disappearing, about the schools they were building, the women they were helping, about Rowan, broken and healing in equal measure. "Yes," she said. "It was worth it." "Good. Then I'm proud of you." Marcus reached across and squeezed her hand. "And for what it's worth, I'm here now. If you'll have me back." "Always." Spring arrived with its usual optimism, bringing flowers and warm breezes and the sense of new beginnings. Lillian's work with the Education Initiative was flourishing. They'd opened 3 more schools with funding secured for 5 additional locations. She was invited to speak at universities, at women's clubs, at gatherings of reformers and radicals. Her story had become a symbol, proof that women could fight the system and win. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. And through it all, letters from Rowan arrived regularly. Not asking for anything, not pleading or demanding, just letters. Updates on Iron Ridge, thoughts on books he was reading, questions about her work. They were becoming friends. Slowly, carefully, with all the caution of 2 people who'd once destroyed each other and were determined not to repeat the mistake. In May, he wrote asking if she'd visit Iron Ridge again. Not as his wife, they were both clear on that, but as a friend who might want to see the progress on rebuilding. Lillian said yes. The estate looked transformed. The east wing had been rebuilt with large windows and open corridors, nothing like the dark, oppressive structure it had been. The grounds were alive with spring flowers, and servants moved about with something that almost looked like happiness. Rowan met her at the entrance, and the first thing she noticed was how different he looked. Not just healthier, though the burns had healed well, but lighter somehow, like he was carrying less weight. "Welcome back," he said, and his smile was genuine. "It's beautiful," Lillian said, looking around. "You've done remarkable work." "We've done remarkable work. Your suggestions on the schoolroom were invaluable." They walked through the estate together, and Rowan showed her everything. The new library, the updated staff quarters, the gardens his mother had once loved that were finally being properly maintained. "There's something else I want to show you," he said, leading her to the east wing. The rooms that had once been her prison were now bright, airy spaces designated for community use. A lending library, a meeting room for tenant discussions, a classroom where local children could receive basic education. "You've turned my cage into something useful," Lillian said softly. "I wanted to make sure that suffering led to something good, that your pain and my cruelty weren't wasted." She looked at him, This man who'd once been her tormentor and was now something else entirely. Not perfect, still struggling with the habits of a lifetime, but genuinely trying. "Rowan," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Anything. That night at the hearing when they read your mother's letters, I saw your face. You were devastated. What were you feeling?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Shame. That I'd become what killed her. That I'd learned nothing from her suffering except how to inflict it on someone else." He met her eyes. "And fear. That it was too late to change. That I destroyed something I didn't even know I wanted until it was gone. And now? Now I'm still afraid, still struggling, but I'm not alone anymore. I have people around me, staff, tenants, even you in some capacity, who remind me that change is possible, that patterns can be broken." They stood in the bright classroom, sunlight streaming through windows that had once looked out on nothing but snow and isolation. "I forgive you," Lillian said quietly. Rowan's eyes widened. "What?" "I forgive you. Not because you deserve it. I don't think forgiveness is about deserving. But because holding on to that anger was like carrying around a piece of Iron Ridge everywhere I went. And I don't want to do that anymore." "Lillian, I'm not saying we can go back. We can't. Too much has happened, but I am saying we can move forward, as friends, as two people who survived the same storm and came out the other side." Rowan's face did something complicated, relief and grief and gratitude all at once. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." They sat in the classroom as afternoon faded to evening, talking about everything and nothing, about books and politics and the schools Lillian was building, about the changes at Iron Ridge and Rowan's ongoing work with his doctor in Edinburgh. It wasn't romance, wasn't even close to romance, but it was real and honest, and maybe that was more valuable than passion had ever been. 2 years passed. Years of hard work and slow healing for both of them. Lillian's education initiative had become a formal organization, with schools in 20 towns across England. She'd written a book about her experience, part memoir, part manifesto for marriage reform. It had caused exactly the scandal she'd expected and sold far more copies than anyone predicted. She'd become someone, not the Duchess of Iron Ridge, not someone's forgotten wife, just Lillian Vance, educator and reformer. A woman who'd fought her way out of erasure and helped others do the same. Rowan, meanwhile, had transformed Iron Ridge into something unrecognizable from the cold prison it had been. He'd implemented progressive tenant policies, opened parts of the estate to community use, and become known as one of the more reform-minded lords in Parliament. They wrote regularly, visited occasionally, had become, improbably, genuine friends. And then, one autumn evening, everything shifted again. Lillian was hosting a dinner for supporters of the education initiative when the butler announced an unexpected guest. "The Duke of Iron Ridge is here to see you, ma'am." Rowan stood in the doorway of Catherine's townhouse. Lillian still lived with her aunt, valuing her independence too much to set up her own household. He looked nervous, which was unusual enough to set alarm bells ringing. "Is something wrong?" Lillian asked, stepping into the hallway for privacy. "No, nothing's wrong. He stopped, clearly struggling. "Can we talk? Somewhere private?" She led him to the small study, her mind racing through possibilities. Was someone ill? Was there trouble at Iron Ridge? "What is it?" she asked once the door was closed. Rowan paced the small room, running his hands through his hair. "I've been thinking about something for months, trying to figure out if I should say it, and if so, how. And I've realized there's no good way, so I'm just going to be honest." "All right." He stopped pacing and faced her directly. "I'm in love with you." Lillian's breath caught. Of all the things she'd expected, that wasn't on the list. "Rowan, let me finish, please." He took a breath. "I know that sounds absurd. I know we're divorced, that we've built this careful friendship, that the last thing you want is for me to complicate things. But I can't keep pretending what I feel is just friendship. It's not. When did this happen?" "I don't know, gradually. Somewhere between your letters and your visits and watching you build something extraordinary from the ruins of what I destroyed." He smiled sadly. "You asked me once what I was afraid of. It was this, feeling something real, Because real things can hurt you. Real things can be taken away. So why risk it now? Because my therapist asked me a question last month. He said, "What's scarier, being vulnerable or spending the rest of your life behind walls?" And I realized, Rowan's voice cracked slightly, I don't want to live behind walls anymore. I don't want to be that man who locked himself away and called it protection. I want to be someone who can feel things, even if they hurt, especially if they hurt. Lillian sat down, her legs suddenly unsteady. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I'm not asking you to love me back. I'm not asking you to marry me again. I wouldn't do that to either of us. I just needed you to know, to have honesty between us, even if it's uncomfortable. They sat in silence. Outside, Lillian could hear her dinner guests talking, laughing, existing in a world where complications didn't involve ex-husbands confessing love. I need time, she said finally, to think about this, to figure out what I feel. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Rowan, she looked at him, this man who'd hurt her so badly and worked so hard to become better. Thank you for telling me. That took courage. Or stupidity, I'm still not sure which. After he left, Lillian sat alone in the study, her mind churning. Did she love Rowan? She cared about him, certainly. Admired his growth. Enjoyed their conversations. But love? Love was dangerous. Love was the thing that had trapped his mother, that had nearly destroyed Lillian herself. But love was also what she'd been fighting for all along. The right to choose who to give her heart to. The freedom to make that choice without obligation or duty or social pressure. So what did she choose? The answer came to her slowly, over weeks of reflection. She thought about the girl who'd arrived at Iron Ridge 2 years ago, naive, hopeful, expecting marriage to provide purpose. That girl had disappeared, and good riddance. She'd been too passive, too willing to accept whatever life handed her. The woman Lillian had become was different, stronger, more certain of her own worth. She didn't need a husband to give her purpose. She'd built that herself. But did that mean she couldn't choose to share her life with someone? Couldn't choose partnership freely, without the coercion of law or social expectation? The old Lillian had married because it was expected. The new Lillian could choose to build something because she wanted to. The question was, did she want to? She invited Rowan to London in November, meeting him in the same park where they'd once destroyed each other with public arguments. This time the setting was peaceful. Autumn leaves, children playing, couples walking arm in arm. I've thought about what you said, Lillian began without preamble, and I need to be honest with you, the way you were with me. All right. Rowan looked prepared for rejection, his shoulders already tensing. I don't know if I love you, not the way I thought I understood love when I was 22, but I care about you deeply. You're one of the most important people in my life. But caring isn't the same as loving. No, it's not. But maybe it's a better foundation. Lillian took his hand. We tried the traditional way, marriage first, feelings maybe later. It nearly destroyed us both. What if we tried a different path? Rebuild from friendship, see where it goes without the pressure of legal bonds or social expectations. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we court each other, properly, like two people who actually have a choice in the matter. No promises, no obligations, just seeing if what we've built as friends can become something more. Hope flickered in Rowan's eyes. You'd be willing to try? On certain conditions. You continue your work with your therapist. I continue my work with the schools. We maintain separate households, separate lives. If we choose to build something together, it's because we want to, not because society or law demands it. Those are good conditions, fair conditions. And if it doesn't work, if we discover that friendship is all we're meant for, we stay friends. No bitterness, no regret. Just acceptance that some patterns are broken and some aren't. Rowan raised her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. When did you become so wise? When I stopped being invisible and started being myself. They walked through the park together, not as husband and wife, not even as lovers, but as two people choosing each other freely. It wasn't the fairy tale Lillian had imagined as a girl. It was better, because it was real. Amets. 5 years later, Lillian stood in the rebuilt east wing of Iron Ridge. now officially renamed the Vance Education Center. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was packed. Dignitaries, reformers, former students from their schools across England. She wore a dress of deep green, her hair styled simply, her hand resting in Rowan's. They'd married again a year ago, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. A small ceremony, just close friends, built on choice instead of obligation. This time, marriage felt different. They maintained separate bedrooms. Lillian had insisted. She'd grown to value her space. They argued frequently about politics and estate management. They drove each other crazy on a regular basis. But they also talked. Really talked. About fears and hopes and the damage they both carried. About how to break patterns while still being human enough to occasionally fall into old habits. About building something new from the rubble of what they'd destroyed. It wasn't perfect. Perfect was a lie sold to naive girls who didn't know better. It was real. Messy and complicated and earned through years of hard work. "Ready?" Rowan asked as they approached the ribbon. "Ready." Together, they cut the ribbon, officially opening the center. Applause erupted. Lillian caught sight of Annie in the crowd, no longer a frightened maid but the center's first administrator, having gone through their training program herself. Mrs. Hallowell stood beside her, smiling with pride. Catherine was there too, looking satisfied with how everything had turned out. Even Marcus had come, his mother nowhere in sight. This was her legacy. Not a title or a marriage or social status, but real change, real impact. "Your mother would be proud," Lillian said to Rowan quietly as they watched students file into the classrooms. "I hope so. I think—" He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "I think we finally broke the pattern. Not just for us, but for everyone who'll come through these doors." Lillian leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. They'd come so far from that frozen wedding day, from the girl who'd disappeared and the man who'd locked himself away. They'd survived the cold, built something warm from the ice, and if that wasn't a legacy worth having, she didn't know what was. Years later, when people asked Lillian about her story, she never called it a fairy tale. Fairy tales were about magic and instant transformation. Her story was about survival, about refusing to disappear, about fighting for the right to exist on her own terms. It was about a frozen marriage that nearly killed two people, and how they'd both learned to thaw. Not through magic, but through choice, through brutal honesty and slow healing and the courage to break patterns that had defined generations. The girl who'd arrived at Iron Ridge had been looking for someone to give her life meaning. The woman who'd left had discovered she could create that meaning herself. And the woman who'd chosen to return, freely, on her own terms, had learned the hardest lesson of all. That love without choice is just another word for prison. But love built on freedom, on mutual respect and hard-earned trust, that was worth fighting for. That was worth everything.